Hi, how are you doing? Welcome to Preventing Child and Animal Abuse. Don't be cruel to a heart that's true. I'm Matthew Dietz, and I'm chair of the Animal Law section of the Florida Bar, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our seminar today. We have a wonderful show for you today where we're going to talk about the link between animal abuse and child abuse, where we have Diane Balkin, Peggy Hoyt, who's going to talk about dog wars, pet nups, and pet trusts, and Justice's Best Friend Act. And Alan Abramowitz is going to talk about that. And then it's going to be me, Matthew Dietz, who's the chair of the Animal Law section, who's going to discuss pets in the foster care system. Now, over the past over the past few years, the Florida Bar has and the Florida courts have gotten very much involved in using animals as a way in which to assist children and a way in which to assist other people that participate in the court system. Just last week, we had a celebration of those animals in the court system for Justice's Best Friend Day. So before we start, I'd like to show you a small video of what the Florida court system and the Florida judges do with regards to animals and the court system.
Laxity or sagging is the #1 skincare concern among women over.
Thank you so much. And right here to my left is Lucy, and she is my litigation support dog here. And now I'm going to turn this to Diane Balkin. Diane recently retired from her position of over 8 years as senior staff attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. While with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, she provided assistance on any issue related to maltreatment of animals. Diane presently dedicates her time on a local and national level, training and consulting with veterinarians, law enforcement officials, and others on how to successfully investigate and prosecute animal cruelty cases. She dedicates a significant amount of time to educating veterinary professionals on their roles with regards to the welfare of abused and neglected animals. Diane has significant experience in local and national criminal laws and assists legislatures and stakeholders in the drafting and refining of proposed legislation relating to animal protection. In addition, before I go on, as you know, this CLE was complimentary, but if you would like a t-shirt like Lucy's wearing, I'll put the link on the chat section, and you can have a t-shirt just like the one that Lucy's wearing. If you would also like to make a donation to the animal law section, you can do that as well. So thank you very much, and Diane, it's all you.
All righty, here we go. Greetings, everybody. I'm going to turn off my camera here if I can. Anyway, greetings. I'm so glad to be here to do this presentation for the animal law section for the Florida Bar. I would like to also add, in terms of my prior employment, I was a prosecuting attorney in Denver, Colorado for 32 years before I joined Animal Legal Defense Fund. This is a picture of my dog Maverick with his little toy, and we will go ahead and move forward. Today I'm going to talk to you about the link between animal abuse and child abuse. It is very clear that it's difficult to draw a line between the two of them, and many of the social media sites and animal welfare and child welfare organizations are morphing photographs of humans, children, and pets to show that anyone can be a victim in a household. And it also stresses the point that people who are violent to animals rarely stop there. It could be an elder, a spouse, a child, or even a neighbor or anyone in the community. Crimes against animals are just like any other crime, except investigators, prosecutors, and courts are already under-resourced and overburdened. Where do you think that they're going to be allocating money? At this point, not necessarily for anything animal related. It tends to be the low rung on the ladder in terms of law enforcement. And in today's climate, we have to take even a different approach to the enforcement of animal crimes due to the climate we find ourselves in, which is unsettling yet eye-opening. The crime scene, including the body of the animal, are often not documented or processed. This is actually true in crimes against humans as well. With resources waning, officers may carry cameras in their cars and may be able to document scenes or victims, but often they do not, and there is a concept called a counter report. It's like if you're in a traffic accident, you go to the police department and file a report over the counter. Or if you're assaulted, I always tell victims, take photographs of your injuries, because in many cases the police aren't going to do so. And if the enforcement agency is animal control, they are likely to not even have a camera on board. So you have to be prepared as a prosecutor or law enforcement that how can you prove a case if it is underdocumented or not documented at all. And Florida has pretty robust animal crime provisions. They are not terribly complicated, but there are many categories that you may not be aware of. So I urge you to research your local statutes. A great way to find them is through Animal Legal Defense Fund's website. They have a comparative table and they have state rankings for the different states, and you can click on Florida and download from the compendium Florida laws relating to animal crimes. And Florida is in the green tier, in the top tier in the rankings. Another thing unusual about animal crimes is that the victim can never tell you what happened. The good news is we have a growing field called veterinary forensics, so we are relying more and more on the science and veterinarians teaching us how an animal experiences pain. They teach us about causation and the difference between accident, predation, and animal cruelty. And animal victims are unlike child victims, although there's often parallels drawn to child abuse or infant abuse where the child is nonverbal. However, a human child is still a human, so we know a lot more about human medicine, and we know about physiology, and we know about what happens to humans when certain things occur, and we are not yet there with animals. And animals constitute, well, there's a huge number of species of animals, so sometimes you might even have an animal that is unique or unusual with even less known about them forensically. These cases also have extremely high social media and mainstream media news visibility. And that causes problems for both animal control, law enforcement, humane agencies, and prosecutors, because citizenry become outraged at what happens to an animal. It's front page news, and it can have an effect on the continued investigation and prosecution, not to mention social media posts, GoFundMe, change.org. So we have a lot of citizens caring about animals that get involved and can affect the jury pool, so we need to be aware of that. Who are the abusers? It's anyone, regardless of any category they may fit into. This is true across the board with criminal conduct and crimes. I always tell veterinarians, don't think that because you believe you have a certain type of clientele that they would not be capable of harming their animal. So I just want to encourage them to keep their eyes open and to presume nothing. There's many news stories about a variety of types of professionals that end up on the other side of the table as criminal defendants in animal cruelty cases. We have dog trainers, police officers, and of course, we also have this growing field to educate police so that they don't shoot canines when they encounter them. Veterinarians, teachers, law students, humane society directors, so it cuts across every border. The youngest defendant I had when I was a prosecutor was this 10-year-old. And this is a photograph of him when he was 10, and he abused that little collie mix puppy, and that's a photo of the dog taken at the shelter. It was fine. He was, a neighbor could hear a dog crying and whimpering out the window. They looked out the window and they saw this 10-year-old holding the puppy by the tail, swinging it, throwing it to the ground, and kicking it. And the puppy was crying so loudly that the neighbor could hear it through the closed window. So the police responded, and what was alarming is that when they rang the doorbell, this child answered the door pointing a toy gun, but it was a facsimile gun, at the police officer, and he said, "Give me back my friggin' puppy." We learned that he had been having some emotional issues and psychological issue for years. Social services and child welfare had been handling him. And when I told the police officer that we really do have to pursue this in our juvenile justice system, which, as you know, they aren't criminals, it's acts of delinquency, because it appeared to me at the time, based on everything I was told, that we needed the courts to intervene to assist this child going forward. It turned out that his mother was alcoholic. She lived with a boyfriend that was physically abusive to her and her children. We also learned that there was probably a litter mate to this puppy that he killed that we were never able to find. He was so profoundly unwell that he was put in a residential mental health facility for several months before he was even able to come to court. And he then received the treatment he needed, and we dismissed the charges. But as we know more and more about the link, his conduct didn't stop there. And I show this to you. This is him today. He was in the penitentiary in Colorado for sexual exploitation of a child, attempted, and second-degree assault for spitting on corrections officers, showing that even though we tried to intervene early, this case was many years ago, and he continued with this path. But in defense of him, he had some underlying issues clearly. Who are the abused? Any and all animals. You have to be aware that in every state there are certain exceptions, and Florida is no exception to that. Often certain conduct is exempt, like research animals, animals in entertainment such as rodeos and circuses, animal husbandry, and the production of the use of animals for the production of food and fiber. So you have to check your local statutes for that. I always, though, try to educate prosecutors that even if there is an exception, for example, for the food animal industry, it's not a blanket exception. And if an individual deviates from what is accepted in the industry and it rises to the level of torture or mutilation, that they could still use the cruelty statute, although it is an uphill battle. Every animal can be covered. In Florida, the definition of animal is any living dumb creature. So you're going to cover a lot of animals, and then they have special provisions for horses, for example. What constitutes the abuse? Anything from intentional to knowing to recklessly to negligently, and from act to omission. We sometimes fear the omissions because it's a challenge for prosecutors to prove that pain and suffering is a result from not doing something, failing to do something. But the good news is that most cruelty statutes can be interpreted to show that neglect and failing to provide an animal with suitable food, water, and a clean environment constitutes criminal conduct. And Florida is no different. They have a cruelty to animals statute, and then they also have regulations regarding the confinement of animals without sufficient food, water, or exercise. When we talk about criminal animal laws, they're kind of twofold. One, protect people from animals, such as dangerous dogs and dogs not licensed and running at large, and those laws that protect animals from people, and that's what we're concentrating on today. There's also an overlap usually between city and state, or city, county, or state regulations regarding animal crimes. So then becomes a challenge to animal control, law enforcement, humane societies, and prosecutors. Which do you utilize? And I always say, if the case rises to any degree of seriousness, you should try to go with state charges, because at least then that conduct is memorialized in a computer system that can be accessed nationwide. When I was prosecuting these cases in Denver, I would have an offender, and I was told sometimes by law enforcement or animal control that they had a previous conviction for animal cruelty in the city court system, and interestingly enough, in Denver, the Denver prosecutors, state prosecutors, could not access city convictions. Let's talk now and turn to the link. I see the link as threefold. One, the link between cruelty to animals and violence towards humans, and the link between a human and an animal, often referred to as the human-animal bond, which we will be hearing about today with other presenters as well. And the link among the agencies and individuals concerned about the safety of the community. We have to work together to deal with violence, which is abundantly prevalent, whether or not the victim is human or non-human, and it is definitely a public health issue that we have to address. Awareness of the link is a matter of public safety and human welfare, not just animal welfare. And this is the kind of position I assume when I take, when I present to law enforcement. I let them know that they need to be aware of cruelty to animals and neglect of animals to make their communities safer. We cannot fail to recognize that pets are part of the family and have been part of the family for centuries. Even some of these early photos and family portraits, they include the pet. I particularly love the little girl in the middle with the chicken. And many people have their Christmas portraits taken with their pets. I also included the chicken and the horse to remind us that animals come in all shapes and sizes, and many of them are pets, whether it's a fish or a horse or a lizard or a snake, and that we have to be mindful and keep an open mind that even though there are certain species or breeds that are not necessarily popular, they still are protected by our laws. We get species bias in cruelty investigations if, for example, the animal involved is a raccoon or a rat or a snake. Or we get breed bias in dogs if the dog is a pit bull or a German shepherd or a Rottweiler. So I always try to impress upon the audience that we need to protect all of these creatures. The human-animal bond is profound. People look to their pets for support, comfort, and security. And in many cases, this is a great issue to be aware of when you're dealing with elder abuse, because in many cases the elder does look to the pet for a host of things, and when the abuser uses the pet to manipulate the victim, this is the area where it occurs. Pets positively impact health and reduce stress. They provide greater life satisfaction, and they help us cope better with loss and grief. And if you think about that last one, think about in the domestic violence situation, often the pet is the source of comfort for adults and humans that are being victimized under the roof. Gail Melson said, "A child in America is more likely to grow up with a pet than with a stay-at-home father." I find this terribly significant and an issue we need to be aware of when we deal with these cases and the role the animal, the abused or neglected animal, may play in the dynamic of a given family. I also include this slide always saying it's really difficult to talk about crimes against animals without showing some photographs, and I've made every effort to minimize this. The stories alone are disheartening and distressing. The significance of being aware of this link is twofold. Number one, for crime prevention, we need to deal appropriately with a person that abuses or neglects an animal because they may well be engaged in other criminal conduct, or they may be showing this criminal conduct as a child, and we need to intervene early. The more we intervene and the more effectively we intervene, the more likely it is that we can prevent future crimes against property, animals, or humans from occurring. It helps us also break the cycle of family violence. Many victims of domestic violence, whether it's a child or an adult or an elder, and if they have a pet in the family, There's a high co-occurrence of violence and assaultive or neglective conduct against a variety of the victims under one roof. And we are trying to impress this upon animal control so that if they see an animal that is abused or neglected, to pay attention to how the children and other adults and elders appear in that household and to take note of it. And there are certain states that are enacting legislation for cross-reporting, mandating that animal control officers report child abuse, which is a huge step in the right direction. We also are trying to encourage intake officers at child welfare offices or animal shelters to add questions about the other species. For example, child welfare, if they're taking a history of the child abuse, they should ask questions: how are there pets in the house? How many? What are they? How old are they? How long do they live with you? Is there any issue involving the care or abuse of the animals? So it really helps us break this cycle. And most importantly, in the area of the time when the victim wants to extricate herself or himself from the situation, they often won't leave for fear of something happening to the pet. Animal abusers are 5 times more likely than non-animal abusers to commit violent crimes. They are 4 times more likely to commit property crimes, and they are 3 times more likely to have drug or disorderly conduct offenses. The importance of this is that we need to let law enforcement officers know that if you've got someone in your community, your precinct, your block, your district that's abusing animals, the odds are they may be engaged in other type of criminal conduct, so they need to pay attention. Mary Lou Rondauer, who's very active in the link, says, simply put, bad people do bad things. There's no particular sequence in which they do them. We used to believe in this graduation theory that if a child was violent or harmful to an animal, he or she would grow up to be a serial killer, a murderer, or a sex offender. But we really do not follow that theory anymore, the graduation theory, because we've learned that, simply stated, people are mean, and they could be mean to humans or animals, and sometimes it doesn't really matter the species to them, and it's difficult to say which leads to the other. It is true, however, that many serial killers have a documented history of animal cruelty as children, but the reverse isn't necessarily true. And once again, we don't know if it's nature or nurture. Is an individual born violent, born hostile, born angry, born to exercise power and control, or is it a result of their environment, or is it both? When I first started learning about the link, I learned about William Hogarth, an artist back in England who lived between 1697 and 1764. In 1750, he made 4 woodcuts called the 4 Stages of Cruelty. So when I thought, look at how smart we are as a society in 2020, and being aware of this link and understanding this connection of violence, when in fact this artist memorialized it well over 250 years ago. The first stage of cruelty takes place in the schoolyard, with children committing different random acts of violence against animals. And remember, this is 1750. So we see the cat being thrown out the window. We see the 2 cats hanging upside down by their tails. We see a bird being held with a youngster trying to put fire, set the bird on fire. There's cockfighting, there's tying the tail, bone to the tail of a dog. And the most important one is kind of there in the center, with a poker being placed up the anus of a dog. So we've got fire, the sexual implications, and the person doing it is the young man wearing the hat with the little, the tam with the little dot on top. His name is Nero, and he will be present in all 4 of the woodcuts, Thomas Nero, and he is sticking the poker up the anus of the dog while another child is trying to tempt him with a pastry to make him stop. So we have these random acts of violence against animals in the schoolyard perpetrated by children. We moved to the second stage of cruelty. We've moved from the schoolyards to the streets and the courtyard, and we've graduated from crimes against small animals to crimes against large animal. Once again in the foreground is Thomas Nero beating the horse that is already down. And if you read the story behind it, the horse is overloaded, pulling a cart full of lawyers. You see the man beating the sheep in the foreground. You see a child getting run over by the wheels, and you posted on the wall, which you can't read, is an advertisement for cockfighting. So once again, remember, we've moved from the schoolyards to the streets, small animals to large animals to other crimes, and these were created in 1750. Cruelty and perfection, we've moved to the third woodcut, and Thomas Nero's there in the center with the red pants, being held by the citizens. They are holding him for the authorities because he has just murdered his pregnant girlfriend. Think about domestic violence and think about today's day and age. These stories, unfortunately, are not uncommon with husbands or boyfriends, or the reverse could be true with a female perpetrator, but when it's the male perpetrator killing a pregnant girlfriend, because she wasn't, in this story, she wasn't stealing enough from her employers. And you can see he slit her throat, and the artist was so spot on that he even portrayed defensive wounds on her wrist. So the fourth woodcut, I should tell you that in this day and age, when people were convicted of murder, they were hanged and then publicly dissected. So the reward of cruelty, we see Thomas Nero being publicly dissected, and in a bit of poetic justice, we see the dog eating his entrails. So I just found it so compelling that this was more memorialized in 1750. We then turned to kind of animal welfare in the United States. Henry Bergh was a New York philanthropist, and he founded the ASPCA in 1866. And what's significant about this is that animal welfare predates child welfare in our country. Child welfare began because of Mary Ellen Wilson, and there's a book written about her. And you can see the welts on her lower legs. You can see what we would call failure to thrive, a child that's been neglected in terms of the quality of, her hair, her demeanor, her size. She was more diminutive for her stated age. And there was no one to investigate because reports were being received by the police because neighbors heard her being beaten. And so they went to Henry Bergh, who dressed up his animal welfare agents, his humane agents, in census-taking clothing. And they went as if they were census takers, because in that day and age, think about this, in the 1800s, they went door to door to count the heads. So they gained entry, found her, and saved her. And then Henry Bergh founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children some 9 years later. Probably the poster child for this link was Jeffrey Dahmer, and the reason I show these photographs is not unlike child abusers or domestic violence perpetrators or animal abusers. He had pet dogs, and on the right it's a picture of Jeffrey Dahmer with his pet dog Frisky. But he was known to decapitate dogs. He put a dog head on a stake in his yard, and neighbors saw it, and actually that photo is accessible. So if people saw that, people didn't do anything. His father dismissed it as believing that Dahmer wanted to go on with a career in science or medicine. Margaret Mead said in 1964, she's a forensic anthropologist, said one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a child is to kill or torture an animal and get away with it. So even though it seems dated, there are still certain segments of society that think twofold. Number one, boys will be boys. And number two, it's just a dog or just a cat. And we have to abandon those thoughts in the face of all of this evidence to the contrary and information that substantiates the fact that we have to deal with animal abusers seriously. Probably one of the best, other than Edmund Kemper, kind of models for this link is Keith Jesperson. He was known as the Happy Face Killer. The book written about him is called I. He was a cross-country truck driver, and he would pick up victims on the highway, on interstate, and kill them. And he killed young women and older women, and most were strangers. And when he killed them, he would leave a note often in the restroom with a happy face on it, kind of attracting the cops' attention to him being the happy face killer. And he, by the way, was a huge stature, 6'9", 240. So you can see even him young with his daughters. And by the way, they've been interviewed on TV series, you know, and that's the one in the bottom is a more recent photograph of him, but he was a gigantic guy. His father was a domineering alcoholic who would beat him with a belt in front of others and once gave him an electric shock. His grandfather was also an alcoholic and abusive. He was constantly teased about his size and stature. He started torturing and killing animals at age 5. It made his father proud. And he would go on in teenage years to staple the paws of a dog or a cat to a board and then throw darts at it. He killed, he says, at least 50 or 60 animals, at least. At age 10, he almost beat a child to death, and age 11 almost drowned another child. Both of them teased him, so he wanted to seek revenge. At age 14, he lost his virginity while being sexually assaulted. So you can see kind of the making of the monster, with these demonstrated acts of cruelty, very young to animals. And he killed at least 8 women. The last one he killed was his girlfriend, and it was the only one actually known to him. If you want to look him up, Keith Jesperson, he does a lot of artwork now, and this is a sample of his artwork. He's actually quite creative. There's some other pieces of art he's done that are distressing, but he does beautiful pictures of birds. The link to youth violence. A child's cruelty to animals may be an indicator that the child has suffered serious neglect or abuse and may lead to an increased likelihood of other violent behavior in childhood and adulthood. And when you think about what makes a child harm an animal or harm a child or harm an adult, and one of the concepts is pecking order battering, that mom or dad beats the spouse beats the child beats the dog. They are desensitized to violence, and it's a way of life under their roof. Another is what we alluded to earlier. We just don't know sometimes if it's nature or nurture, but we do know that a child even witnessing animal cruelty or witnessing cruelty to another child or an adult is harmful for that child and might evolve for them into their acting out violently. Schoolyard shooters, 43% have histories of animal abuse. It's really difficult to absorb, you know, what would or should a parent do if they know a child is harming an animal. And I had more than one case with a juvenile suspect where when confronted with it, the parents denied it. It didn't happen, or it was just a dog or just a cat. And part of it is a parent doesn't want to believe that their own child could torture an animal. One of the more recent stories, a couple of years ago, was in Florida, and it was clear that Nicholas Cruz had a documented history of animal cruelty. The median age for the onset of hurting animals is 6.5 years old, earlier than bullying, vandalism, and setting fires. Isn't that stunning? So we need to really pay attention when an animal is harmed by a child or a juvenile. because it may be one of the first kind of indicators that there's something amiss. When we look at children, we have an adult abuser abusing a child. The child's the victim. We've got the adult abuser abusing animals. The animal is the victim. Then we have the child as an abuser who abuses an animal, or the child as an abuser grows up to be an adult abuser. This is kind of a vicious cycle, but an animal victim is intertwined with this picture. One of the best pieces written, even though it's from 2001, is a special issue in the Juvenile Justice Bulletin put out by the Department of Justice and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and it is fully downloadable from the internet. I handled the case of a juvenile defendant who was 17. The case of Samson. Now at his house at the base of a tree, there's a big rock piece to Samson. He killed his pet dog Samson, who was a Chow mix. This juvenile had a history of having been sexually assaulted by male relatives from the age of 4. And he was profoundly depressed and psychologically damaged and emotionally and physically damaged from this at a young age. He was displaying, harm towards animals, and he was on medication and had been institutionalized more than once before the age of 10. When he killed the dog Samson, we had him evaluated by a psychiatrist who found that the danger of homicide were great and the danger of suicide was great. They documented his history of having been the victim of abuse. And by the way, he lived across the street from the high school he attended, and he told his teacher that the only way he felt power was if he killed, and that the voices in his head were getting louder and more difficult to control. And so this young man was in terrible shape. And we sent him to a residential care facility. He also had a history of setting fires. When I asked his mother about whether he set fires, she said, yes, he did. And I said, did you report them or get some help? Because we have a juvenile fire setter program in Denver. You don't have to file charges on a kid, but a kid that's setting fires can avail himself of the program. And she said, no. I asked her why not. She said it's because they were small fires. And by the way, as a child, he destroyed his toys with a hammer, and the hammer became the tool that with which he killed his pet dog, Samson. So it's clearly linked to his having been the victim of sexual abuse. This is Samson, and there are a huge number of alarms that go off. Number one, he killed the dog in the middle of the night. He had planned it for some time. He took tree branches and stripped them down. He made this cross and put up a sign, and it says, "A work of the next king. It's pure art." He killed Samson with a hammer, carried the dog a half a block and put it on display. And he also impaled the dog's anus with one of the sticks that he had made, and it was done after the dog had died. So we have the use of the hammer, we have the fire setting, we have staging, the sign, and displaying the animal. He wanted to get caught, clearly, and he wanted to show what he had done. And you can see a different viewpoint of the dog, and in a strange and very well predictable and sad twist, we put him in a residential facility, and he was able to return home. But within 3 years, he did in fact commit suicide. Current national efforts. Probably the best resource to learn about the link between cruelty to animals and violence towards children or any other type of violence is the National Link Coalition. and it is free to join. There's a link letter that's published monthly. It's a fabulous resource for citizens as well as lawyers and judges, because Phil Arco, who manages the website, who's just brilliant, he memorializes every law related to the link or domestic violence and animal cruelty, including any states that have pets and protection orders, any states that enact cross-reporting. He also memorializes every documented link case where a child and animal are abused at the same time, or a homicide case where an animal's abused, or a child abuse case where an animal's abused. So you get these updates once a month. It is free to sign up for, and it is read worldwide. He also took it upon himself, because there was a lot of issues about where do you report animal cruelty, and he has drafted and written down thousands and thousands of locations, whether it's animal control, sheriffs, police, or prosecutors, on an interactive map. So if you don't know where to report cruelty, you can go to this website. It is also linked to a bibliography at www.animaltherapy.net, and it is broken down to all these topics. So every authoritative article written on the link is available at this website, and he updates it daily. There's also the Colorado Link Project. I'm in Denver and proud to say you can see these drop downs, assessment and intervention. It's probably the best resource for what do you do with animal abusers? What tools are there? And resources and toolkits. There's toolkits for prosecutors and for judges and so forth. We also know that in 2016, the FBI started tracking animal cruelty, NIBRS. It's the National Incident-Based Reporting System. They broke it into 4 groups: simple or gross neglect, intentional abuse and torture, organized abuse, and animal sexual abuse. The problem with this, it's voluntary. Not all law enforcement agencies participate in NIBRS, but it's going to ultimately be a good tool. There's a user manual available online. We also know that they are making certain connections between terrorism and animal cruelty. There was a case in New York where a man threatened to kill his dog and torture his dog. They called the authorities, and when they broke in, he was preparing a gigantic, not gigantic, a bomb, a pressure cooker bomb. And what I alluded to early on is that we need to understand the causes of violence and the things that can help protect people and communities to prevent violence, and animal harm or neglect has to be part of that equation. The link in the context of family violence. When animals are abused, people are at risk, and when people are abused, animals are at risk. We cannot extricate one circle from the rest of them. Phil Arco has also created a power and control wheel of animal abuse and domestic violence, showing that the dimensions of domestic violence, such as emotional abuse, economic abuse, legal abuse, threats, isolation, also apply when an animal is part of the picture. Threat to kill the animal, custody battles, harming or killing children's pets to intimidate them and to prevent them from reporting animal cruelty. I also think that it's important to add this kind of 5th dimension to it, which is criminal activity, which we discussed earlier, that oftentimes animal cruelty and neglect are tied to other criminal acts. We have the battered child syndrome, Henry Kemp, 1962, Denver, Colorado. The battered woman syndrome, Lenore Walker, 1979, who was also from Denver. And then Monroe and Thrusfield, who are from the UK, in 1996 created the first kind of paper on battered pets to make sure that veterinarians look for prior injuries and old injuries to pets. What does the research tell us? Batterers who also abuse pets are more dangerous than batterers that do not. They use more controlling behavior, more forms of violence. There's more sexual violence and marital rape, and more emotional violence and more stalking. Multiple studies show that up to 71% of DV survivors reported their partner killed, harmed, or threatened an animal. We are now we tell the police that when you go to a domestic violence call, sorry, I have a siren. I don't know if you can hear it. It's passing. We tell the police when they are taking a report on domestic violence, which by the way, in Colorado, police must investigate domestic violence and must collect evidence. They are trained to ask whether or not a pet was harmed or killed during that incident or any time previously. 32% report their children hurt or killed the animal. 75% of the incidents of abuse occurred in the presence of children. Here's some case examples. This is Spike. He was a little Basenji shot in the face with a BB rifle. You can see 3 little marks on his face where the BB pellets hit him. You can see he's a failure to thrive. He's thin, his poor coat condition. This was him in the shelter. His owner, who had previously been convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence, gave his 6-year-old son a BB rifle for the 6-year-old's birthday and then proceeded to shoot Spike in the face in the presence of the child and then set the dog loose. The dog was nearly deaf, blind, and incontinent. And we were able to track back that he actually had adopted the animal 12 years earlier, but you could see he was devoid of any emotion. So we charged him with animal cruelty and child abuse for committing this act in the presence of the child. Our child abuse statute allows for that because he placed the child in a situation that could endanger its life or health. And we realized, I remember one cop saying, so should I be charging child abuse every time domestic violence occurs in the presence of a child? And I said, yes, you should. So here's the dog before. He was taken to the shelter. He was given dental work and health. He was adopted and lived another 2.5 years. And here's the same dog after. So it also shows you that a dog's demeanor can be a big indicator that there's something wrong in that household. And he was, by the way, banned from visiting his son. He had to have supervised visits for a substantial period of time. Animal abuse and child abuse similarities. We sometimes see pattern injuries. We see cigarette burns. Failing to seek medical care for broken bones or other abnormalities. And of course, neglect. The importance of similar transactions, Florida Evidence Code, we call it like 404B, yours is like 90.404, that you can use similar fact evidence to show proof of motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, or absence of mistake or accident. That's why it's so important for police to ask whether or not there were acts of harm against an animal, either for that incident or another incident, because as prosecutors, we can use them, evidence of similar transaction, to show motive, identity, absence of mistake, etc. So here's an example of a domestic violence link case. So here we have a cat, and you can see from the diagram where the cat, it has a cigarette burn on its back. And I'm a big fan of demonstrative evidence. It helps the judge and jury understand what happened and where it happened and how it happened. And I was called by the veterinary clinic. The cat was brought in with a cigarette burn. They were told by the client that the client's girlfriend's son had done it. He was visiting from Pueblo, Colorado, which is about 90 miles south of Denver. And they believed him. We got the name of the son, the girlfriend's son, and I was able to access computer records and determined that yes, he did have a criminal history. So we see the cat, the injury, and we memorialize it. And it turns out that he had a misdemeanor assault case involving domestic violence against his girlfriend, who he had also burned with a cigarette. So you see how 2 separate incidents in 2 separate cities could be used in 2 separate cases as evidence of similar acts. And in, as expected, she also returned to him, and he acquired a second assault case on her And you can see the old healed wound and new wounds. What about prior inconsistent statements? What about recanting victims? I've had several cases where the perpetrator harms or kills an animal and then the victim doesn't show up in court or recants. And the good news there is that in your evidence code, you can introduce an inconsistent statement if it was given under oath and subject to the penalty of perjury. In Colorado, the testimony does not have to be given under oath or subject to the penalty of perjury, but in those states like Florida where it does, we encourage animal control, law enforcement, and intake officers, when they take the victim's statement at the outset, to have them sign the statement under penalty of perjury. So then if they recant, it can be used to impeach them. So I had a case with a recanting victim, and why do they recant? The close relationship with the defendant, the fear of more and greater violence to the victim or to the pet, external pressure, defendant acts remorseful and apologetic, and the victim feels like they're to blame. So I had a case, this is Erica, she was beat, you can see how swollen her face was, and she saw her boyfriend kill her Chihuahua puppy named Stewart. And she gave a full videotape statement and then recanted later. And here's a picture of poor Stewart. He kicked him to death. But we were able to use her early videotape, so we charged felony assault on her and felony animal cruelty. How do we protect pets and humans? Florida criminal procedure conditions of pretrial release. The court can issue an order to protect a person or his or her property. In Colorado, we have a distinct protection order, both in criminal and civil court, prohibiting the transferring, taking, concealing, harming, disposing of, or threatening to harm an animal owned, possessed, leased, kept, or held by an alleged victim or witness. Notice we even protect witnesses' pets. So this is great model legislation if you want to look to it in the future. And we have the civil protection order that also reads similarly, and it also allows for making arrangements for the possession and care of an animal despite ownership. And how do we also address this in a better way to help extricate victims, human and non-human? It's by community-based sheltering for humans and animals. We call it domestic violence pet support. There's the safety program by Allie Phillips. She helps people organize and acquire funding for sheltering animals together with the victims, and they can be large facilities, small facilities, in a garage with cages, with separate rooms, and they take into account children and adults who fear animals or who are allergic. Red Rover provides grants, and the Animal Welfare Institute, and there's other web sources where you can find out where this co-sheltering is present. And here's a shelter locator in Florida. So you can see where there's on-site housing or off-site housing. When you resolve animal cruelty cases, you can do humane education, surrender the animals, diversion. You can bring it to the courts where you get evaluation, treatment, restitution, ownership, and possession bans, commitment and incarceration, and importantly, pre-trial conviction bonds so that we can get money for the care of an animal while a case is pending. We have the forensic animal maltreatment evaluation and another one called the ARAT that's in progress, to look more closely at offense-specific evaluations, including the relationship between the animal and the human, the degree of injury, the location, family history, criminal history, and motive and intent. So at the Colorado Link Project, you can find these psychological assessment tools. My recommendation is the FAME one. BARC is used a lot because it's like online, and it's for the simple and low-level offender. The ARAT is still under development, and it will be great. So this is once again from the the Colorado Link Project, showing how at risk is a public by an act of animal cruelty, from low risk, medium, high risk, and red flags, and also the degree of intervention we need to take if a person is abusive to an animal. And with that, I will turn it over, and I'm available for questions later. Matthew, who's going to take it over now? Matthew, you're muted.
Why don't we take a 5-minute pause?
Okay, and I just wanted to let the audience know that I have sent to Ricky a PDF of the resources and information in my PowerPoint that they can ask for a copy of. So if they didn't get to take those, so that'll be available.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just had a problem muting it, and I was pressing the wrong things, and all the buttons were going wrong. Okay, Peggy, do you want to start now?
I can. We can get me positioned to go, and then we will move forward there.
Perfect.
All right.
Are they taking a break or?
Nope, they're still on. We have 93 participants, and if anyone has a question, they could type in their questions in the question and answer part in the dialog box, and we will be able to answer all of your questions.
So let's see. I need to share my screen. All right, Matt, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Excellent. So if you want to do a brief introduction, I will start.
Okay, I will do a brief introduction. And Peggy Hoyt is the some reason. Oh, here it is. Peggy Hoyt is the past animal law section chair, and she describes herself as an attorney, animal advocate, and a pet mom. Her love for animals has developed as a child when her father, John A. Hoyt, was president and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States. She's the author of All My Children Wear Fur Coats, How to Leave a Legacy for Your Pet, a book for pet parents and the importance of including their pets as part of their estate plan. She also hosts a weekly podcast on Buzzsprout called All My Children Wear Fur Coats. Peggy?
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate it. And I look forward to answering questions for folks. And probably the best way to ask questions is either to put them in the chat and let Matt ask them, or you can email me privately at the end. And I will stop my video and start my presentation. So I think I'm one of the lucky people on this presentation. I get to talk about something I'm really passionate about. Pet trust is my primary passion, but today I'm also going to be sharing with you information about what happens to our pets in the event of divorce. Is there such a thing as a pet nup? And if we live long, happy, healthy lives, and our pets do too, how can we provide for our pets in the form of a pet trust? So at my house, pets are family too. I assume they are at your house too. I am going to introduce you to a couple of members of our animal family. That these don't belong to me personally. These are dogs that belong to Michelle Adams, who's a junior associate with our law firm. And we have Harry, Ron, and Albus here joining us. Just quickly, I want to touch on pet ownership in America today. And 85 million households own at least one pet. And if you look at that statistically, that's 67% of all households. And I'm always a little amazed at how many millions of dogs and cats and birds and small animals, reptiles, I don't know who owns all these reptiles, but a lot of people apparently, and 7.6 million horses. I happen to fall into that horse category, and I have to say I'm doing my fair share with 3 horses of my own. Let's talk a little bit about the history of pet custody. And this goes all the way back to 1944 in a case called Akers versus Sellers. This was an Indiana case that involved a Boston Bull Terrier, those cute little black and white Bull Terriers. And this couple, when they were divorcing, the dog was not part of the official property division, but instead was left at the marital home in the custody of the former wife. And the husband argued that it was in the dog's best interest to actually live with him, but the court didn't agree with this, and said that, however, they did attribute some weight to the fact that comfort was provided by the companionship of man's best friend. So that's really just where we started with the whole pet custody issue in the United States. One of the things that comes up in this context is the fact that pets are still classified as personal property, much like a chair or a table that can be bought or sold or even given away for no economic value. But we have to ask ourselves, are they really something more? And I believe that this definition is evolving. But what happens in a divorce context if state law doesn't address either how to value a pet or how pets should be, I hate to even use the word distributed, but shared among the marital partners? And of course, this can create a lot of additional stress on families and the pets because of these legal ambiguities. There's really 3 identifiable approaches to pet custody, and we're going to talk about all of them. The first one is the personal property approach, where a pet is treated just like a lamp or a table, something that would be easily divisible and we maybe wouldn't have too much sentimental attachment to. The second approach is the personal property plus approach, where pets would still be considered as personal property, but with some additional considerations of the pets being unique living creatures. And then the last approach is a best interest analysis, where the court could actually sanction visits or contact or access to the pets post-divorce. So let's talk about pets just as pure personal property for a minute. In this context, there's no specialized treatment or consideration for the pet. The pet is sometimes assigned an economic value based on that pet's fair market value. Some of the characteristics that we might look at would be pedigree, or the value of the litter mates, or the replacement value of the pets. The fate of the pet could be left to the spouse who actually ends up in possession of the pet. The irony here is, even though we might argue that a pet is priceless, the court would take the position that the pet had no economic value, and it really does fail to capture that priceless nature of our pets. And I think that this definition results in the least desirable outcome for a divorcing couple and their pets. If we look at the personal property plus category, this recognizes that the law might just be a little too cold, looking at pets as just mere personal property, and that this view is pretty outdated. So what we're starting to see is a line of cases where our pets are getting more consideration. So a Tennessee decision in 2013, Baggett versus Baggett, where the court actually considered the needs of the dog and the party's ability to care for those needs. A Michigan court in 2012, Aho versus Aho, found it proper to award Finn the dog to the plaintiff, and the purpose of doing that was so that all of the household pets could be kept together. Alaska was our first state to actually create a statute that empowers trial courts to consider the well-being of pets in the context of divorce. The last approach, the best interest approach, is really the most progressive of the three approaches. And if we look at a Connecticut court case from 2013, Van Arsdale versus Van Arsdale, here the court awarded joint legal custody of the dogs, but did identify one place as being the primary principal residence of the dogs. An Alaska case in 2019, again, relied on the animal protection statute to award the family dog on the dog's best interest theory. And an even earlier case, though, from Arkansas, Dixon versus Dixon, the court there awarded joint custody with the wife as primary custodian, subject to visitation rights. I'm aware of at least one instance where there was a gal who she and her husband were sharing custody of the dog, and she took her husband back to court after she realized that the husband was delivering the dog to visit her and letting it out of the trunk of his car. And that was very upsetting to her, and she actually ended up spending all of her retirement assets trying to get custody of her dog, sole custody of the dog. So obviously not all courts are following these cases. Sometimes these can be a drain on judicial resources to enforce or modify visitation schedules. The courts don't like the idea of people coming into court on a consistent basis to fight over what's happening with the pets. So the courts have basically said that pets are not entitled to the same protections as children, despite the fact that for some of us, they may actually occupy a similar place in our hearts. And in Florida, our approach is more of a personal property approach, and that was demonstrated in Bennett versus Bennett, which clearly defined pets as personal property and not subject to this best interest analysis. And so in Florida, we're still resolving the fate of our pets by the equitable distribution analysis. So potential alternatives. So there is a case out there, the Travis case, that basically suggested that if we can spend judicial resources resolving matters in divorces related to the use of an Escalade or a Ferrari, or deciding who gets to stay in the house in the Hamptons or use the Aspen Chalet, that certainly we should be able to give room to real considerations related to our treasured pets. And so there have been some hearings with limited remedies that make more sense than our current just property approach to pets. What the courts would like us to do is resolve issues related to pets through mediation rather than litigation. And I think in this vein, it encourages the use of what we'll refer to as pet nuptials, which would be an agreement between the parties in advance of the dissolution of the relationship to try to resolve those issues related to pets in the event of divorce. There's a great Florida Bar Journal article on this, and you can check that out. It's in the June 2017 issue, and it was written by Professor Timothy Arcaro. So I would commend that to your reading. If you look at Florida Statute 61.075, this is where it talks about the equitable distribution of marital assets and time sharing of our kids with two legs, but still our statute is going to be silent on the pet issue. So really the conclusion for Florida is that we're still using that equitable distribution standard. The court is not going to take its time or its resource to resolve pet-related issues. We have to continue to encourage our legislators to maybe adopt a best interest approach related to pets. We've just heard a lot about pets in the law, but let's talk a little bit more about pets and children in the law, because there are a fair number of us that believe that laws involving animals should continue to evolve, and presumptions have shifted in child custody cases. So the question here becomes, why can't those presumptions also shift in pet custody cases and start to look to the best interests of the pets rather than just that property analysis? I think that we might be able to get a little more interest if there were issues that were related to the abuse of animals or the neglect of the pet. And in those cases, courts seem to be a little more willing to evaluate the best interests of the pet, because we know that if pets are being abused, there's likely other abuse in the family. I think we're starting to make some leeway in that regard. But divorce can be hard on our pets, not just from a legal perspective, but also just on the psyche of our pets. We may notice that they have a loss of appetite, that they could be irritable or nervous or have behavior issues. I have a client who recently separated from his spouse, and although the dog was her dog when they came into the marriage, as they were dissolving the marriage, the dog actually made the decision that he would prefer to stay with the husband. And fortunately, they're not going to have to fight over this issue. And the wife allowed the dog to stay with the husband. So other factors that are being considered within this best interest concept are factors like the mental and emotional well-being of a pet. Where is the dog going to get more attention? Are they going to be walked more frequently? Are there other dogs or animals present? Is there some benefit to keeping household pets together? Are there other animals or children in the household that might cause concern if we did keep the pets together? How much affection is being shown to the pet in the household? I will admit to being a little bit of a pet hoarder, or maybe I'm like one of those people that thinks having 10 kids isn't too many. In addition to my 3 horses, I have 7 dogs and 2 cats, and I can't imagine separating my animals from one another. So how do we assign a value to our pets if we have to do that? If you're a person who adopts pets like I do, they don't tend to have a lot of fair market value, so assigning a value to the pet for equitable distribution really wouldn't be a very equitable result in my case. But then we want to think about who had the pet before the marriage, if in fact that was the case, or was the pet acquired during the marriage? And if so, is it going to be considered marital property? And then, of course, we get right back down to that sentimental value of the pet. So issues related to pets in the courts generally are going to revolve around this idea of standing. And of course, animals have no legal standing in court, and that's potentially a problem for the best interests of the animal. I will mention that we are going to have a workshop next week on Desmond's Law, which talks about appointing someone like a guardian ad litem for the benefit of a pet, so that pets could be represented in the courtroom. So right now, though, only pet parents have standing in a courtroom, so the pets don't have that standing to sue. And again, in order to prove standing, We're going to have to show that the plaintiff suffered or soon will suffer some sort of injury that was reasonably caused by the defendant, and that injury needs to be redressed if the plaintiff were to happen to win in court. So we're talking about pets in the relation to divorce, but it also raises questions about what does it mean for unmarried couples that have pets. I mean, we know that the Chapter 61 doesn't really address what happens with our pets from a divorce standpoint, but there's even less protection when it comes to unmarried couples, because family law courts only will consider disputes between unmarried couples if they involve children. So what can we do? We can always litigate. Obviously, if we go to court, the results are going to vary from court to court, could be dependent on a specific judge's personal point of view. Are pet nuptials an answer? Pet nuptials would be most appropriate in a premarital or postmarital setting. I coined a phrase a few years ago called the Life Alliance Agreement for unmarried partners. I also think that mediation is a good option, and I might mention that the state of Connecticut actually requires mediation for divorces involving pet custody. So for those of you out there who have an interest in mediation, this might just be another avenue. I want to give you some drafting tips for pet nuptial agreements. I've actually come up with a checklist, which I believe is included in the materials that were provided. But some of the provisions to consider when drafting a pet nuptial would be clearly identifying the parties, including the pet, and how do we go about identifying our pet. We want to make sure that we identify, you know, their name, their sex, their breed, their birthday, and then any unique markings or tattoos or microchips that might be available. And we want to make sure that we address in that pet nuptial agreement provisions for the lifetime care and maintenance of the pet. This could even get into what happens if one of the pet parents were to pass away. We definitely want to talk about custody or visitation arrangements, holidays, weekends, extended periods of time. Are you allowed to take the pet out of the state? Are you allowed to take the pet out of the country? How long can you have the pet on vacation? What are the precautions you're going to take for making sure that the pet stays safe? And then what about the payment of pet-related costs? Who's going to be responsible for training, for grooming, for veterinary bills? And within the context of veterinary bills, addressing both ordinary versus extraordinary services. Is there going to be pet insurance to pay for health care for the pet? That might be one way to manage the cost of care related to a pet, or to share the cost of care. Other things that you might want to consider could include, are you going to allow the breeding of the pet? I come from a background of spay and neuter, but if your pet's not spayed or neutered, are you going to address the concept of breeding in that agreement? What happens if there is an unexpected or a chronic illness? Who's going to pay for that? What types of treatment are you going to agree on? Are you going to pull out all the stops? Would you do transplants? Would you do chemotherapy? Would you do radiation? And then if the pet dies, or when the pet dies, how are you going to make end-of-life decisions related to the euthanasia of the pet? Is there going to be a funeral or a memorial? The end-of-life care for pets is becoming big business. I am a member of the Pet Loss Professionals Association, which is actually a division of the International Cremation, Cemetery, and Funeral Association. So you know those folks that make their living in aftercare or end-of-life care are focused on these very important pet end-of-life issues. In terms of your own personal disability or death, you want to make sure that any pet nuptial agreement would be coordinated with your personal estate plan. That could include pet trusts. It could include pet care powers of attorney. I'm going to talk more about these, veterinary powers of attorney, and who and how are you going to pay for the lifetime care of your pet. We just had a whole presentation on pets and domestic violence, but I just want to reiterate that we have a Florida statute 741.30 that allows petitioners to file injunctions for protection against domestic violence. And this now includes the intentional injuring or killing of a family pet. This is not the subject matter of my particular talk, but I just wanted to hit some of the laws that are out there. That's the 741.30, as well as also a new law that was passed that requires every county to maintain designated shelters that can accommodate people with pets during emergencies. And these are just examples of how the law is evolving. To take into consideration and to acknowledge how important our pets are to us as family members. I'm going to shift gears a little bit right now and talk about estate planning and pets. Estate planning for pets really is nothing new. I came over from England, where the common law has always favored gifts to support animals. In the United States, our first case was in 1923 in Kentucky, where the court upheld the validity of a bequest to a trust for the benefit of a pet. Even though there wasn't a statute, they found that it was a humane purpose, and therefore they were able to validate that gift to the pet based on that humane purpose standard. Since then, and starting in 1990, the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws added a section to the Uniform Probate Code. Since then, we've also added provisions to the Uniform Trust Code, both of which validate trusts for the care of a designated domestic or pet animal, as well as that animal's offspring. And I'm happy to report that today, all 50 states and the District of Columbia have adopted a pet trust statute. So it doesn't matter where you live in the United States anymore, we have the opportunity to provide for our pets in the form of a pet trust. I will just mention, some people find this interesting, that Minnesota was our last holdout, and they finally adopted their pet trust statute in 2016. So what state pet trust statutes do is they actually provide the default provisions. So basically what that means is that you can draft a pet trust where a pet is the primary beneficiary, and if you leave something out, the idea is that the state pet trust statute would fill in those gaps. The only thing you want to make sure that you don't do is you don't include any provisions that would be contrary to public policy or are illegal. I've seen a lot of bad drafting related to pet trusts, so I think it's important to spend some time really studying this area if you want to protect pets with pet trusts. I ran into at least one pet trust that was wholly precatory in its nature, and basically said that the trustee of this pet trust could choose whether or not they wanted to provide for the pets. And not a very good pet trust as far as I'm concerned. I want to make sure that my pets are taken care of, and I don't want the trustee to have any illusions or delusions that they don't have to do that. So we couldn't talk about trust without talking about the Internal Revenue Service. And of course, the IRS doesn't currently recognize a trust that has a beneficiary as a pet or an animal. But being the IRS, they say that notwithstanding, they're still going to classify a pet trust as a trust for tax purposes under Section 41 because they don't want to miss out on those potential tax dollars. And as a result, the income that's earned in a pet trust would be taxable at trust tax rates. And trust tax rates reach the highest income tax level at very low levels of income, about $12,900. I always want to argue that I would like to have it taxed at the pet's income tax rate. The other thing that doesn't exist within the context of estate planning for pets is there's no such thing as an income tax or estate tax deduction for gifts to a charitable trust if you make a pet the lifetime beneficiary of that trust. Years ago, there was actually a bill pending. It was called the Morgan Bill, named after the drafter's dog, Morgan, that would have amended Section 664 of the Internal Revenue Code and would have created effectively what would have been a charitable remainder pet trust. I would love to see this come back in the future. So if any of you get any rumblings of that or know anyone in the legislature, maybe we could push that through. So what do we need to do to create a written action plan for our pets? First and foremost, I think the most important thing you can do is identify at least 2 people or organizations that would be your pet caregivers, those people that would be responsible for the lifetime care of your pets. I know this is hard for a lot of people because they don't necessarily have people that they know or that they can trust. I will say emphatically that you cannot assume that your family, even your spouse, is going to be willing to take care of your pets. I've seen way too many instances where pets ended up homeless because the spouse did not want that responsibility after the death of their spouse, the owner of the pet. So something to think about. Second thing you want to do is assemble a notebook to hold important information and documents related to your pets. I call these pet profiles. I believe I've included a pet profile form in your materials. This would be very detailed information about your pet, its likes, its dislikes, and basically what I refer to as babysitter instructions. I suggest to people to carry an emergency pet alert card in their wallet. And that way, if you happen to be in an accident or something happens to you and somebody's going through your wallet looking for your health insurance card, they might actually find this pet alert card that would alert them that there are pets in your home that need to be cared for. So I keep my emergency pet alert card right behind my health insurance card, or you could put it right in front. I also like the idea of posting in case of emergency decals or stickers on doors and windows to alert first responders to the presence of pets in the home. I know of at least one case where a dog perished in a home fire because it was in an inside internal bathroom, and the first responders just didn't even know that the dog was there. So in case of emergency decals, very, very important. And then, of course, I believe wholeheartedly that you should include your pets in your powers of attorney and in your estate plans through the use of pet trusts. All right, I mentioned the pet profiles a minute ago. These are really special, detailed instructions related to your pet. I refer to them as babysitter instructions. If you're part of an organization, you could create a co-branded form that would do some dual advertising. These pet profiles should be kept with your pet trust and should be provided to all persons who might eventually be responsible for the care of the pets. Much like drafting a pet nuptial agreement, they should include information related to the age, the breed, the gender, and the identifying marks of the pet, their eating and food requirements, any special conditions they might have. Do they take any particular medications, or are they allergic to certain things? What's their medical or veterinary history? Who would your first choice of a veterinarian be? And then what are those special traits that only you would know about your pet? All pets have their little quirks. And so I think it's important for a future pet caregiver to be aware of those as well. I believe in comprehensive estate planning for both people and their pets. I do not think estate planning is a do-it-yourself project, because I just think there's too many ways to make mistakes. The law is far too broad, and there are just too many pitfalls that people could get into. But what I like to recommend as a comprehensive plan would be a durable power of attorney that would include pet care provisions. So in the event I become mentally disabled, my nominated agent, they could make financial decisions for me, but they would also be empowered to make pet care decisions related to my pets. There's also what I call a pet care power of attorney, where you would actually nominate an agent to make pet care decisions. This would be more of a limited form of power of attorney, and it might be most appropriate in the context of you might be going on vacation and leaving your pet in the care of a pet caregiver or pet sitter, and just giving that person the limited authority to make decisions on behalf of your pets without giving them the broad authority to make financial decisions on your behalf. Also, for your own protection, you need a durable power of attorney for healthcare that nominates people for everyday healthcare related decisions, living wills that allow decision makers to make end of life decisions based on your expressed wishes, saying, I don't want to be kept alive by artificial means. I am a huge fan of pet trusts, if you can't tell, but they come in two different varieties. They could exist as a standalone pet trust, a pet trust that's created solely for the purpose of protecting pets, or it could be a testamentary trust that actually arises as part of a living trust or a last will and testament, but wouldn't actually come into existence until after the death of the trust maker or the testator. Comprehensive estate plans could also include charitable planning. We mentioned that a little bit earlier. Many of my pet-loving clients are also very charitably inclined. And then I also like to talk to folks about life insurance solutions, because sometimes life insurance is going to be the best source of funding to ensure that there's plenty of resources available for the lifetime care of your pets. And I have at least one client who purchased $1 million life insurance policy solely for the purpose of making sure that his pets were going to have plenty of resources available. So let's just talk for a second about standalone pet trusts. So a standalone pet trust, in my opinion, is the very best option. It's created during your lifetime. It takes effect immediately upon creation, and it should be funded, meaning that assets should be delivered to this trust, retitled into the name of the trust. The trust could also be the future recipient of retirement plan benefits, or, as I mentioned a moment ago, life insurance. The trust should contain provisions regarding the care of your loved pets in the event that you become incapacitated. So the appointment of a successor trustee, as well as the appointment of a temporary or permanent pet caregiver if you're unable to provide that care. As I mentioned, the trust should be funded with a variety of assets that can include cash, securities, bank accounts, your retirement plans, and life insurance. The nice thing about a standalone pet trust would be that other parties, third parties, so other family members or friends could also contribute money to the pet trust. So let's say you had a standalone pet trust and then both of the spouses could direct monies to that pet trust for the lifetime care, or other family members that might be so inclined could also direct money towards the pet trust. Pet trusts are usually what we refer to as grantor trusts, which means that any income that's earned on these trusts is reported on the income tax return of the trust maker, and that would be true during the lifetime of the trust maker. And standalone pet trusts should always be part of a broader, more comprehensive estate plan. But essentially, here's how pet trusts work. The trust maker creates the trust. They name the beneficiaries, so that would be the pets. That would be your pets that you have now or pets that you might acquire in the future. And you can be very specific or you can be very broad and general about that. You're going to nominate your pet caregivers, and I like to have at least 2, as I mentioned, but 3 would be ideal. You're going to nominate a trustee who's going to be responsible for overseeing the management of the trust assets and maybe provide the oversight for the pet caregiver. You might also consider creating what I call an animal care panel or a pet care panel. And this is just an additional panel of people that would provide oversight for both the trustee and the pet caregiver. So let's say, for example, you didn't have a family member that was able to take care of your pets, but you know that that family member would have a vested interest in the welfare of your pets. You might appoint 1 or more friends or family members to this animal care panel to make sure that the pets are getting the proper lifetime care. And then, of course, in the trust, you want to address what happens when the last of the pets passes away and who will be that final beneficiary. I like to recommend charities because I think they're less likely than humans to try to contest a pet trust and perhaps bust the trust. And the best example we have of that, of course, is Leona Helmsley and the creation of a trust for her dog Trouble that was funded with $12 million, and a court stepped in at the request of a human beneficiary to reduce the amount of that pet trust from $12 million to $1 million. I don't agree with that outcome because I think that Leona Helmsley, as the creator of that trust and the owner of that pet, had the right to leave however much money she wanted to leave for the benefit of her pets. So I'm going to outline here a little bit some drafting considerations. I've touched on these things, but this just gives you a little bit more in terms of who you might consider. You always want to address what the compensation is going to be, what are their duties going to be, what powers are the trustees going to have, and then what do you want the animal care panel to do if you're going to use one, and again, providing for compensation. I don't think that it's ever quite fair to ask people to take on the responsibility for pets without proper compensation. I see a lot of times people might say, oh yeah, so I'm going to leave my dog and $1,000 to my friend. Well, $1,000 sounds generous, but it might not be, depending on the actual life expectancy of that pet or the potential care needs of that pet. You know, if somebody left me a horse and $10,000, probably wouldn't be enough money. I know how expensive horses are to take care of, and I would suggest to most people that they need to really rethink that. I'll talk to you in a second about kind of coming up with a formula for the cost of care. As always, we want to identify our pets, making sure that they're not confused with another pet. You can see my picture here along with two of my favorite pets. That's Abby and Layden. And my t-shirt actually says dogs are the new kids. And I love that picture. It makes me sad to look at it because the Papillon that I'm holding is actually no longer with us. And I always smile when I see her, but it makes me a little sad too. So just in terms of this pet identification, let me just mention that, you know, if you're a person who likes Boston Terriers or Black Labradors or Golden Retrievers, it's not inconceivable that others, people coming in from the outside, might not be able to readily identify these pets like you can. So making sure that your pets are microchipped or have some special identifying marks that you can point out to the future pet caregivers. I've already talked about identifying the existing pets, any after acquired pets, and then how do we calculate the cost of care for our pets. We want to consider what types of pets we have. Are they cats? Are they dogs? Are they horses? Are they reptiles? How many pets do we have in total? What are the age of these pets? What are our care requirements? Different people have different levels of care. And then what's the size of your estate? In my particular estate plan, I want my pet caregiver to actually move into my house to care for my pets. I don't want my pets to have to go anywhere. So my trust says that my pet caregiver will move into my primary residence. They will live there. They will take care of my pets. That 100% of my assets will be available for the lifetime care of my pets. Any other beneficiaries, nieces, nephews, charities, etc., they all get to wait until after my pets have all passed away. And when asked to come up with a formula for lifetime care for a pet, I think it's important to figure out what do you spend on your pets today, and then extrapolate that into what do you spend on an annual basis, and then multiply that by some extraordinarily long lifetime. So let's say that a person would say that a horse typically lives to be 25 years of age. I would extend that by at least 5 years and say, well, this horse is probably going to live to be 30, or if you think a dog might live to be 15, extend its life to 20, or cats, if they might live to be 20, extend their life to 25, just to make sure that you have enough money in the trust. I'd much rather see people overfund trust than underfund them. And then, of course, the trust needs to talk about how are you going to compensate, or what are the trust distributions going to be? How are you going to reimburse that pet caregiver for the costs? Is the trustee going to be responsible for paying all of the household expenses? Are they just going to make monthly distributions to the pet caregiver? Lots and lots of different ways to do that. I already mentioned talking about the standard of pet care. What does daily care look like? What does emergency care look like? What are the circumstances under which you would be willing to have a pet euthanized? What kind of aftercare do you want for your pet? And then who are going to be the remainder beneficiaries, and what are the circumstances related to the termination of the trust? I want to give you some resources that you can use. I wrote a book called All My Children Wear Fur Coats, How to Leave a Legacy for Your Pet. It's in its 2nd edition. It probably could go into a 3rd edition. I do have a legacyforyourpet.com website, as Matt was kind enough to mention at the beginning. I do offer a weekly podcast on Buzzsprout or wherever you get your podcast, and it's called All My Children Wear Fur Coats. and we talk every week with somebody in the pet industry who's doing something interesting for the benefit of pets. I also created a charity called Animal Care Trust USA. Keeping loved pets in loving homes is our mission, and it's a solution for pet lovers and their trusted advisors. So we are a 501c3 charity. We can act as pet trustee, and we offer some rehoming programs, or if you are one of those people that wants to keep your pet in your home forever, we offer a forever home program. We also can provide guidance on the creation of pet trusts. We can work with attorneys in other states, and we've created the nation's first pooled pet trust called the Forever Love Pet Trust. You can find us at animalcaretrustusa.org if you have questions or are just interested. And that's going to be my presentation. I see that there are some questions out there, and I want to see if...
I can read the questions out to you, Peggy, if you release the screen.
Okay, let me see how I do that.
And then we'll do questions for a few minutes, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. So Peggy, the first question that we have for you is, Peggy, do courts consider therapy and service animals pets? Also, are therapy and service animals valued with a property analysis differently than pets?
That sounds like a Matt question.
It is, but it was, Peggy, was it addressed to you? No. Therapy and service dogs have an essential value that's being put into to the services they do. So even if we look at it like in the property concept Peggy was talking about, you would have to pay a certain amount of money in order to train an animal, in order for it to be a therapy animal or to be a service animal. So that would be an increased value of that animal as a piece of property. Right, Peggy?
Yes, I don't disagree with that, yes.
Now the next question is a question for both Peggy and Diane. Are there volunteer organizations that can assist, that are working on trying to change laws so pets are treated more like human children than like property?
This is Diane. You can always reach out to Animal Legal Defense Fund, www.aldf.org. They dedicate an immense amount of time and energy to perfecting legislation and increasing all animals' rights, with particular emphasis on farmed animals as well as animals as property, trying to recreate this concept that they are more than mere property, that they are sentient creatures. And they did, I'm sure you all are familiar with the Justice lawsuit. It was brought on behalf of a horse. It's pretty interesting, and you can find that as well on their website.
Another question we were asked was, are there any organizations working on changing laws so there are greater penalties for abused or neglected animals? Actually, in Florida, there was a move to make the penalties stiffer for people that that use dogs in the midst of domestic violence or child abuse. As that is often an issue that we see, or that many folks see, with regards to child abuse and domestic violence, using an animal as a wedge. Diane?
Yeah, I would also suggest ALDF does that as well, but you have to be mindful of the concept of criminal justice reform. And there is some resistance to increasing penalties now for animal cruelty because they want to reduce criminal penalties across the board. So even though it's being met with resistance, we still pursue it and try to expand upon accountability for the offenders.
And Diane, there was a question for you. You had indicated a statutory definition of animals that indicated that includes any dumb animal. Is there a definition of a dumb animal, or is there an assumption that all animals are dumb except humans?
Okay, the Florida statute specifically says it's at 828.02. The word animal shall be held to include every living dumb creature. And I do not know of a state, there may be a state that defines it, but the common understanding is that dumb animal means any animal other than man. And also dumb refers to the fact that the creature being animal is mute, voiceless, or speechless, and it has nothing to do with intelligence.
Going back to the issue about using animals as a form of domestic violence or child abuse, have you seen that a lot in your career, Diane?
Yes. The animal is used as a pawn, and it's either threats or direct harm. For example, if you leave me, I will kill Fluffy. Or they slit Fluffy's throat and they say, see what I did to Fluffy, you are next. And we also always know that the most dangerous time is when the victim is deciding to leave, and that's why they have such grave concerns for their pets. Pets are also used to threaten children, saying, if you tell mommy what daddy did to you, what I did to you, I will hurt Fluffy. So they're used and manipulated in a number of ways, and think about the strength of that because of the bond we have with our animals. And often the animal is the only source of support in the household. So
we're going to take a 15-minute break. When we get back, what we're going to address is Justice's Best Friend Act, and also we're going to address pets in the foster care system. So these are two very exciting issues about how animals are now used in our justice system and to help children proceed in the foster care system and to feel better. So that's how we're going to end our week this week.
Yeah,
but,
one quick note, I sent a PDF of my presentation to you, Matthew, and to Ricky, so that any attendees can email you and you may send it to them.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we're going to be back at 3:15, and then we're going to start with Alan Abramowitz, who's going to talk about what we've done in Florida to improve the justice system with the assistance of animals. So thank you so much. And we'll wait another minute, and then we will start. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Matt Dietz, and now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Alan Abramowitz. Alan is the Executive Director of the statewide Guardian Ad Litem Office. Since his initial appointment 6 years ago, the GAL program has grown from 5,000 people to more than 10,000 volunteers, now representing the best interests of over 25,500 of Florida's most vulnerable children. Under his leadership, the GAL program has also championed legislation focused on the best interest of the children, being adopted, promoted normalcy in the lives of foster children, worked to enable teens in foster care to get driver's licenses, and developed training to improve legal advocacy statewide, including specific initiatives on advocacy for children with disabilities. Now, again, it's my pleasure to present Alan Abramowitz.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Just want to say I noticed that Greg Morton's on, prior animal law section chair. He was very much engaged when we did Justice Best Friend Act in 2017. And just wanted to recognize him for all the work he did and when he was chair and even after. So just wanted to mention him on there. The other thing, I want to thank Matt for that at the beginning, how we started this all off when he had the video of all the judges and dogs and what was happening in court. The expansion of therapy animals and facility dogs has grown so much in Florida. And just want to salute everyone out there that's involved with that process, because it is making it better for victims, children, witnesses. The slide here, I want to make a couple comments about. First of all, you see my email address, and you also see my phone number. That is my cell phone number. And anything I mention in this video, if I talk about a study or something that you want, if you send me the email, I will send it to you. But some of the things I talk about regarding brain science and adverse childhood experiences and some other parts about the bill, I don't consider myself an expert, but I've read enough and understand enough that I can get you the primary source that I'm using. The picture on the video is actually in Judge Gooding's courtroom, the Honorable Judge Gooding from the Fourth Circuit in Jacksonville. And this picture was taken about probably 5-6 years ago. And it was interesting because we had some guardian ad litems that had therapy dogs, and they were using them to help their kids. And then we had some other people that had dogs that didn't want to volunteer for the guardian ad litem program, but they thought their dog could make a difference in the life of children, and they wanted to have their dog volunteer. And so we worked with them. I thought it was great. And I remember a day here, and this is the day that the dogs got sworn in by Judge Gooding. They all had a little guardian ad litem ID card with their picture on it, but it was a really nice day. And if you know Judge Gooding, he'll do anything to help children get through the day, especially difficult days or an adoption day. The main areas I'm going to cover during this presentation is I'm going to generally talk about the science of trauma and how it impacts victims and witnesses. I'm going to talk about the evidence of support for therapy animals or facility dogs, how dogs in court help. Then I'm going to talk about Justice's Best Friend Act, which is a 2017 law that was enacted. It was called House Bill 151. I'm going to talk to you a little about that. Then I'm going to talk to you about the task force on forensic interviews created the same year and why it was created, and what is out there regarding administrative orders. And last, a call to action about continuing the effort to advocate for children and animals with a couple suggestions of future legislation. The first thing I feel I need to do is show a video, because I don't think I can describe what happened in the Second Circuit better than the Second Circuit program that actually put together a very short video, less than 5 minutes. It's the Florida Courthouse Therapy Dog. It's the Second Circuit right here in Leon County. The program director is Stephanie Perkins. And if you want to create a therapy dog program sometime in the future, she is the person that I would link you with to talk about it. It's clearly the largest therapy dog program in the state, and maybe the largest therapy dog program in the country. Ricky Mitchell is the dog that's licking the girl's face, and Chuck Mitchell is the person watching. And Ricky Mitchell is, you all know, those especially of you of the animal law section, there was an award named after him. He was trained to go to hospitals, courthouses, schools, and had over 25,000 interactions as a therapy dog. Ricky was the driving force behind the 2011 law, the precursor to the 2017 law, that allowed therapy dogs to be used in court, and was there for Justice's Best Friend Act. As you know, the Animal Achievement Award is named after Ricky. It's called the Ricky Mitchell Award. It's a huge award that the section gives out. The video gives you a better insight because it has the people that needed to be involved to create a program and led to actually the law in Florida. Here we go.
Every single witness that I've ever worked with in my 25 years has dreaded going to trial.
Every eye in the courtroom watches them. And they watch them walk all the way across the courtroom. Everybody in the courtroom is waiting on you to get up there. And I've experienced that. It's an unpleasant feeling.
It's very frightening to adults, but it's even more so for a child.
If you're prosecuting these cases, you've looked in the eyes of a child both when they're terrified and when they finally start feeling comfortable talking to you.
Anything that we can do to make that courtroom more fair, I don't even use the word friendly anymore, to make it child fair results in the fair administration of justice, and that's what everyone wants in that courtroom.
I'm telling you that with the use of the pet therapy, they're going to be more comfortable talking to you, and as a result, talking to that jury about what happened.
You know, because what we're trying to do is get the truth out in the courtroom, and we only bring that truth in through witnesses, and so those witnesses need to be effective. So it's a good plan.
People are really uncomfortable with change, but the legal system changes every day. We have laws enacted and changing every day. The way we prosecute and handle ourselves in the courtroom has changed dramatically in the last decade. How we take care of our victims and our vulnerable witnesses in the courtroom has changed dramatically. So we need to change the way we do business, and this is the next step.
At first I said, we don't need dogs in the courtroom. They came to me with the idea, and I said, well, I want to hear some ground rules.
And I said, well, let's think about this and see how it's going to work.
You know, you think about it, and it kind of evolved, and it got to be a better and better idea. They came back to me with a plan of how it would be done. I approved the plan, and it went flawlessly by that plan. And I think it was good for certainly helpful for the child, but it didn't in any way distract or impede or obstruct our court proceedings.
We're the ones that have to make sure that there's a level playing field, and everything has to be fair to everyone. And, so I was unsure as to how that worked, but I don't have any hesitancy about it anymore. It works well.
When I recognized it wasn't just a warm and fuzzy experience for people, that there is hard science behind pet therapy. And that hard science is what's going to get me better information. And if we're looking for better outcomes, we need better information. And the pet therapy gets me good information.
Our teams are screened initially just to make sure they have the correct aptitude and temperament to do this kind of work. Then they go through a workshop, they do training classes, a formal evaluation. Then they also have to make visits and get on-the-job training.
They will come in with the knowledge through the training that they have received that will aid that judge in putting together the right atmosphere so that it's fair to everyone.
As therapy teams, we had to learn more about court procedures and how to work within the courts, and the court folks had to learn more about what the potential of the therapy teams would be and how they might be able to help and not get in the way.
We've drafted protocols. We have procedures that differ by county depending on their particular needs, like certain entrances they want them to use, certain elevators, walkways, areas of access. We've developed oaths of confidentiality.
The dogs I send to this program and the only ones I'll send into the courtroom have been proven. They have proven track records. They're calm, they're quiet, they're very manageable, and they like to be around people.
Because
concerns have been, on the one level, are these dogs going to be okay in public? But the main thing they want to know about, are these dogs going to be solid for these kids? Are they going to be there for the kids? And are they not going to be disruptive to the process? And in every case that we've had, and we've been doing this for years and years now, that's been the story.
The first prosecutions ever done, long before we had DNA, CSI, any of the scientific forensic arts, it always started with the testimony of one witness and another.
If the witnesses, the complaining victim, are uncomfortable or afraid, they're not going to be able to share their story. I've seen these children go from just sitting there like looking at me to being able to talk and smile and, you know, be able to interact with us. And then we have to try to, in steps, transfer that to them being able to interact with us on the stand and answer our questions. And it's been invaluable in that.
It helps the relationship with the prosecutor, helps the relationship with me, and it helps that child to be able to trust us.
This does not make things worse. This simply allows your 8-year-old to be able to, or your 4-year-old, to be able to speak like the 24-year-old, because they are in a comfortable spot.
I did have a case a couple years ago. I remember we brought the dog in for the deposition, and this was a very tiny child. The dog basically sat there on the ground, and the child, as she talked about the horrific things that this individual had done to her, just pet the dog. And I just remember her petting him, and she did an excellent job in the deposition.
For an hour and a half, this defense attorney was grilling this young girl. And I was under the table with my therapy dog, keeping my dog calm while she had her head in this little girl's lap for an hour and a half. And the little girl had her arms wrapped around my therapy dog's head for an hour and a half, sometimes squeezing it a little harder than others, but enabled her to get through this deposition.
We also had the dog later come to the trial, and this particular individual was convicted of capital sexual battery on a child less than 12 and is serving the rest of his life in prison. So that was a case where I feel like the dog was instrumental.
A prosecutor who embraces this program shows not only their dedication to their job and doing the best that they can for the case, but also for their complaining victim. And that is a dual balance that prosecutors have, is to seek the truth, but to also caretake for the victim.
If we're able to do this thing that's really able to help our victims out, and we're not creating issues, and there's case law now that says that this doesn't affect a defendant's due process rights, it doesn't affect their right to confront the accuser, I'm totally for it. I mean, I think it's something that if you're able to do, you really should look into, you know, getting involved in one of these programs.
Give it an opportunity, and I think that they will find that, that in the first instant they'll say, okay, I have no problems, no concerns about this. It's a positive.
Is the therapy animal going to make the child tell the truth, or are you going to make the child free to tell the truth? And I don't think the dog will coach a child to lie. So I think it will be a good thing, and I think it will catch on big time all over the country. And a prosecutor will be very negligent if they don't utilize every tool that's available to get the truth to the people that get to decide the truth, which is the jury.
I hope you found that as powerful as I did. They've done a great job with the program in the Second Circuit, Leon County, and it has evolved and evolved. And actually, I was talking to Stephanie, I think they have close to 250 therapy teams. They use them for state hospitals, Chattahoochee, lots of different things. There's another video at the end. I don't think I'm gonna have time to get to it, but it's a documentary about the facility dog. And that's a reference, we'll get into it later, about the definition in the 13th Circuit, Tampa, with a woman who's a handler named Brenda Coker and a dog named Tibet. But you will have the link so you can watch it later. Before I talk about adverse childhood experiences in trauma, there's a consensus among researchers that a meaningful proportion of children do not disclose abuse during an investigative interview. Those that do this work understand that. It's a problem often, because oftentimes that may be the only evidence to substantiate the abuse. And I'd like to point out a UCF dissertation that was done about in 2013 or 15, around there. They took a look at the issue with children 2 to 12, and it included a therapy dog during the program to those that did not. And what it did was it showed that therapy dogs increased children's rates of true disclosure, and they only used cases that had substantive corroborative evidence that an incident of abuse occurred were examined. And it's common methodology that they use. And the stunning thing about that was that it was 2015, Agent Jesse Holt was the person who did the dissertation at UCF, 33.7% disclosure for those that did not have the therapy dog, 81.8% disclosure for those that did have the therapy dog. So the relaxation really does make a difference. Now, when you talk about adverse childhood experiences in how this ties into science, according to the Center for Disease Control, these adverse childhood experiences, and you've probably heard it as ACEs, are traumatic events that occur in childhood. An example could be witnessing violence, abuse, neglect in the home, having a family member attempt suicide, substance misuse, being neglected. All these things give you a score. The higher the score, the more adverse childhood experiences you have. These adverse childhood experiences, a lot of people that go to court tend to have more than others that do not go to court. Adverse childhood experiences are also linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, substance abuse in adulthood, and it's generally associated with trauma. Youth in foster care and victims or witnesses of crimes have higher adverse childhood experience scores than the general public. And there's numerous studies on it. And children in foster care actually have at least 5 times more likely to have anxiety, depression, and behavior problems than children not in foster care, because they've been through a lot, and it's hard often to testify. Now, quickly, I want to tell you how the brain works with regard to the trauma. Trauma is sensory. It's in the sensory part of the brain. That's the base of the brain, and can be triggered by sound, smell, and sight. The traumatic event is often what brings a person to court. Their brain reacts like, you know, fight or flight, and the court event can bring this back. So when they get to court, they might see the abuser, or everything might come back because of what they're seeing or the stress level. One of the interesting things about traumatic memory is it's fragmented and languageless. So we are asking children and victims who have been traumatized to participate in a verbal process where trauma is not coded. It's a huge challenge. You can see what I'm talking about. It is stuck in the area called the limbic system. It makes it difficult to get the information that is needed so that facts can be known. The scientific research is something that is pretty clear at this point. Animals lower the heart rate if you're petting them, the blood pressure, and the interaction demonstrates physiological effects in subjects. Again, if you pet a dog, your blood pressure will go down. In reality, dog changes your brain chemistry. It has an effect on the brain through touch and sight. Touch is interpreted in a specific part of the brain, which is where we process the emotions. It's called the limbic system, and it's at the hypothalamus. It's the base of the brain, and that's where you regulate body temperature, release hormones, your heart rate's determined. The things that you're really not controlling. And it's the command center that controls all these functions. Scientists have found that petting a dog has an effect on that area of the brain. It releases serotonin and dopamine, which affects emotions. And when stressed, a hormone called cortisol is released into the bloodstream. Petting a dog reduces the cortisol level and lowers the heart rate. In fact, the studies have shown that this even works for non-animal lovers. The results are the same. There's a number of studies dealing with emotions and looking at oxytocin levels. And in learning about this, they did a lot of studies with MRIs and people and dogs, and they showed that oxytocin levels are increased between mothers and babies who touch frequently and decreased when they are prevented from touching. And the studies also show it increases for romantic love. They actually look at couples that are in a romantic relationship versus single people. So this is oftentimes why oxytocin is often referred to as the love hormone. So there's lots of studies, and what we find is petting a dog actually increases oxytocin and reduces cortisol. And so this is impacting the brain and relaxing the person, the heart rate goes down, and they can testify. Now, there are a lot of studies on this, and there is consensus. There's no one saying anything different. So I'm not going to get that much more into the studies, but the breed of dog also shows a difference in the oxytocin levels when compared to like pet dogs. The facility dogs are bred and to be dogs that are really calm, not aggressive. And what they find is selective breeding of these dogs has a specific act on the oxytocin levels. For children, having a dog present helps lower the heart rate in stressful situations, just like when you testify in a courtroom. And a couple of the studies include that with children, just a few minutes with a dog, they're able to tell the dog how they feel, and they indicate they would find secrets in the dog. And with 12 minutes with a dog has shown to lower blood pressure, and they do these studies at mental hospitals, with just in virtually every way you can talk about it to show that it's impacting the brain chemistry and allowing that person to be able to communicate, because that's what it's showing in the end, that if they get relaxed, the heart rate goes down, that they're able to tell, they're able to talk about what happened. As you all know, I mean, most people on this are lawyers. You know it's scary to go to court, even for us lawyers. But for children in abuse and abandonment and neglect cases, it can be very traumatizing. And in dependency cases in particular, it's even more challenging because there's just not one court hearing where you do the trial. You actually have to go to court a lot. Kids in foster care, the court case can last a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you're going back to court frequently. So it's not just a one-time thing, that it could go on and on and on. The science, of course, supports the use of dogs in court. Victims and witnesses who feel calm and safe are better able to recollect the facts, and I think we got that from that presentation. And they can actually facilitate, you know, the truth coming out and being able to tell their story. Case law around the country supports the use of dogs in court. State laws vary about when you can use a canine. Florida, fortunately, with a few other states, actually has a statute. So we have something to turn to. There are many states that don't have the statute. But according to the National Center for the State Courts, there are at least 7 states that do have it, and Florida is one of them. The other states fall in 2 groups. There's the type of state that use of dog allowed only if it will assist the witness in testifying, and then the other group of states, a use of dog allowed only if it is necessary to facilitate the witness's testimony. Courtroom dogs have been used since as early as the 90s, but in recent years it's really taken off. Some may be concerned that the dog could be a distraction and could detract from the decorum, or the dog could cause sympathy. So there's been these issues come up about why someone might argue that you cannot have you would not want to have a dog in court. And there was one case in Florida about that called Lee versus State from 2011. It was a reversal. And in that case, there was a dog in the court, but it was actually more of a guard dog. It wasn't a dog for the witnesses or anything. The judge had brought the dog in, and the defendant also had leg irons on, and the court reversed it, and pretty much because of the leg restraints. But it did state in there that the dog looked like it was there to protect the judge. You got to be careful about that, especially if there's a jury in place. In fact, more and more, there's the judges will make it so the jury won't even see the dog. The dog could be behind the jury, the box, so where the witness is testifying. And what we've done in this state often, and especially in the 13th Circuit, is no one even knows the dog is there. He's that trained up where the child may be holding the leash and the jury will be brought out and back without knowing that there was a dog even there. But still you have the ability to, if something does happen unexpected, you could have a corrective instruction. But you know, in reality, if you look around the country at different appeals cases, these cases are not getting reversed. The one case that got reversed in Florida really dealt with the shackles, and the dog wasn't there for a witness, or it wasn't a therapy dog. I think it was actually the judge's dog, and it was acting more like a guard dog, and it appeared to the jury that apparently this defendant is dangerous because you have to have a dog there to protect everyone. Prior to Justice Best Friend Act, 92.55 specified only children in sexual abuse proceedings could have dogs in court. The goal of this new law was to reflect current practice and validate the expansion support from policy lawmakers. I recall when we had the 13th Circuit created the facility dog program in Tampa, and their dog was not a therapy dog, but the statute said therapy animals, and it was not, that's what it was not. So that was the triggering point that we need to update the law to have the word facility dog in the statute because it wasn't there, and this was kind of a new thing. So just generally speaking, new law specifically allows children in dependency proceedings to use dogs in court. It identifies adults with intellectual disabilities, a group able to use the dogs in court, and adds facility dogs to the conversation. Now, I mentioned earlier the 90s when in Mississippi they had a dog that, when I researched it, that's what I could find. It was a German Shepherd. And then in 2003 to 2004, they started this innovation of dogs that were classified as pure facility dogs. And there's a podcast called Dogged Justice. You can find it, just type in the word dogged with 2 G's, justice, where Ellen O'Neill Stevens, who started it over there in Washington, tells her story about how it led up to it and how the word facility dog came about. By the way, the word facility dog was a compromise pretty much from the podcast and the people in the know when they were developing that. No one was really happy with the term. Well, the first law was in 2011, and that was the Walk in My Shoes Act, and it was victims of sexual abuse less than 16. It was amended in 2014 that if the sexual abuse occurred prior to 16, but the person was older than 16, they could still use the dog. And although we're talking about facility dogs and therapy dogs in criminal court or dependency court, I tell you that you could probably find other ways to utilize them, and judges would be willing to allow you to do that. Well, in 2000, so we're going to do this law. We're going to add facility dog. That was the first step. We're going to add facility dog, and the first thing we noticed is in the statute it talked about service animals. It is not, we did not want service animals to be included in the statute, even though it was already there, because that is federal law. We did not want the judges to think they had discretion with regard to service animals. In fact, prior to this new law, in 2011, the Dana Farmer, who was the Director of Public Policy and Disability Rights Florida, went through every statute to take out the word service animal wherever it didn't belong. This was the one place it was missed, because when they did the search, it didn't say in statute service animal. It said service or therapy animal. So it didn't get caught. So we were able to fix that. So there wasn't this belief that judges could have any discretion with regard to service animals. Pictured right there is Brenda Coker in Tibet. Great pair, but I gotta say that Voices for Children, which is the nonprofit in Tampa, and the Guardian Ad Litem program in Tampa got together and created this program. They've now added a second dog to Tampa. I want to show you the statute, specifically what was removed and what was added. So the next couple slides are actually what the statute changed. 92.55, again, we struck registered service or, because first of all, you don't register service dogs, but that was not appropriate. And second, we added or facility dogs. The second part of the statute is we struck the limitation about sexual offenses of victims. And what we did was we added victims or witness under the age of 18, a person who has an intellectual disability. And that really came about because of a case in South Carolina. There was someone with a disability that witnessed a murder. And when they were in trial, they actually had to be cross-examined by the perpetrator, who represented himself. And the person was convicted, and it was the right thing to do, or a sexual offense victim or witness. If you notice at the bottom, we actually add or child abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Now, courts have been using it in dependency court. In fact, it's probably the place that has the most flexibility, because in dependency court, where you do child abuse, abandonment, and neglect cases, there's no jury. So it's just the judge, and it has really made things able for kids to find their voice during trials, or if they want to talk to the judge in chambers later. But the dogs and facility dogs and therapy animals really have helped. Now, the definitions. Initially, we didn't even want definitions in the statute, because it gets pretty tricky when you do definitions. There is describing different categories of animals. Sometimes you have conflict, but they wanted definitions. So these are the two definitions that we ended up with. Facility dog means a dog that has been trained, evaluated, and certified as a facility dog pursuant to industrial standards, and provides unobtrusive emotional support to children and adults in facility settings. It is, I think the key term there is provides unobtrusive emotional support. Facility dogs are really, really good for jury trials, because no one's going to know they're there, that they've been bred and trained to be able to lie there. In fact, in hearing the experts talk about it, they say the only way they're going to probably hear them is if the dog starts snoring. But facility dogs are the dogs that have very, very intense training. There's a group called the Assistance Dogs International. It's a coalition of nonprofits that train and place assistance dogs, and they have standards. And these dogs are the dogs like in the 13th Circuit. There's one in the 9th Circuit named Tonks. Denise Konis is the handler, and these dogs also have handlers. Tibet, who the documentary is about that you can watch later, was trained at Canine Companions for Independence, and that's a training program for facility dogs, actually service dogs, but also facility dogs in Orange County. And they train Labrador retrievers, golden retrievers, and crosses of these two breeds. And these dogs go through amazing training. I've seen pictures of it. I've seen a picture where they have these dogs being trained with cats running all over the place. I've seen where they have these dogs on a tennis court and people playing tennis around them. These are working dogs. They need to focus on what their job is. And so we've even seen them bring them to a child care facility and where other people are running around. These dogs are very highly trained. Next is therapy animals, and a very similar definition. They're brought to hospitals and nursing homes and used to provide support to victims and witnesses during interviews and testimony for some courtrooms. And the important thing to understand about this is anywhere in the statute where you can use a facility dog, you can also use a therapy animal. So the definitions aren't so important as to can the dog do the job that that you would need them to do. So I would not get too bogged down in either or, but I would focus on where was the dog trained and can he do the function you want him to do. I did want to mention the sponsors of this bill real quick that led the effort. Jason Brodeur, who we recognized all three of these sponsors last week on Justice Best Friend Day, which was last Friday. It was the Animal Law Section, DCF, and GAL. Jason Brodeur was chair of the Appropriations Committee of Health and Human Services. And let me tell you, if you get the chair of the largest budget committee to sponsor a bill, at the time, they weren't even permitted to sponsor bills, but he went out of his way, got permission. He wanted to do this bill and did a great job with it. Just so you know, Jason's also the one that sponsored Ponce's Law, which said judges could stop abusers, animal abusers from owning pets and increased fines for animals. The other two sponsors, Senator Bill Monford loves dogs, and he is the person at the place where they have the largest animal therapy dog program in the country, I believe. And so he was a natural person that wanted to do it, did a great job. And Senator Lauren Book was the prime co-sponsor, and everyone knows Lauren Book is the CEO of Lauren's Kids. She's also a senator from the Palm Beach area. And anything that involves reducing trauma for kids or helping abusers be accountable, she's front and center, and she was front and center for this bill and has been working on bills like this as long as I've known her. I want to mention at the same time that this bill was going on, Gail Harrell was doing a bill to review child forensic interviews. I'm not going to get into too much details into it, but the task force was chaired by Jay Howell. I was his co-chair, and they were looking at administrative orders and how can we do these interviews of kids and do better, especially some of the unique areas in child abuse, especially when it came to like human trafficking. As many of you know that do criminal law, there's administrative orders on how many times you can do a forensic interview for children. And the current laws may not be meeting the needs of what we learned in science, especially with victims of human trafficking that takes a while to even develop that trust. I do want to point out that they talked about the environment in the report that was given to the governor and the president of the Senate and speaker. They talked about the unique needs of children and focused primarily on human trafficking and other needs that might not be met because some of these laws on interviewing were 20 years ago or even more. And everyone was different. There's one circuit that you can only talk to a child once with a forensic interview. The sixth recommendation was important. In the recommendation from this committee that included state attorneys, CMS, a lot of experts, they said, when available, a therapy animal or facility dog may be considered as a resource to reduce stress and traumatization for children during court proceedings. Scientific research shows that the presence of such animals significantly reduces physiological and behavioral distress, including lowering heart rate, blood pressure, which allows children to feel safer and calmer, which provides an opportunity to effectively recollect facts. The use of facility, service, or therapy animals can assist the child in articulating their experiences in court settings. I bring that up because if you do get into any motions or want to convince a chief judge to do an administrative order, you can show them this report. And the report is on the Department of Health website. But part of this report that was provided to them led to the next step, which was another group called the Child Forensic Interview Advisory Committee that's now getting more into the weeds on this. And they're looking at such things as the administrative order on forensic interviews. And let me tell you, this is a very great group that involves a lot of different people from different views, including public defenders, parents, attorneys. It has a large group, and they're coming to a consensus about minimum standards. And so that report won't be available to June 21st of next year. And that's going to be an important report because it's going to operationalize the task force that was created by the legislature. This is the documentary that I can't show. Please watch it. The Vimeo, or it's on YouTube. You're going to love it. Voices for Children of Tampa, the Courthouse Dog Program. Her email is there. If you want to create a facility dog program, you need to send Brenda an email, and she will link you up. She'll educate you, and she'll link you to the people you know. In the therapy dog program, Stephanie Perkins in Leon County can do the same. Just talk about next steps and where we're going. Right now, there is possible federal legislation. It's pending. And this legislation is going to have it's called the Courthouse Dogs Act, HR 5403, and it's going to expand dogs in federal courts. And Representative John Rutherford from Jacksonville, he used to be the sheriff, now he's a representative, is the co-sponsor. And it's going to authorize federal courts to allow certified facility dogs to accompany a witness testifying in criminal proceedings. And, you know, it's already been in the Senate too, so we're getting close to that one being done. The second thing, and this is possible next steps, a visitation of children in foster care with pets. Pictured there is a boy named Caleb, and his parents' rights were terminated, and I was his guardian ad litem. And when we talked to him, he used to talk about his dog, and I set up a dog visit, even though his parents' rights were terminated. We set it up, and I've never seen him happier, ever. And, you know, when we remove children from their parents because of abuse, abandonment, or neglect, we got to really start thinking about what's happening in this house with the pets too. And so I think it's an important issue, and whether the pet needs to leave with the child, which I'm all for if we can place the child like that, or to even have visitations with the pet, I think it can make a big difference for that child. Another thing is creating model motions and orders for facility dogs or therapy animals use in court. There are five circuits with administrative orders. A couple of them are outdated. We've drafted a model order for facility dogs or therapy animals. It's going to really take a champion in each of the circuits to get this going. But right now, this work group is working on the model orders. I think it can help, and maybe even it could be put into one of the rules of judicial administration, one of the rules that they have through rulemaking. But we're in the process of that right now. Also training attorneys for use of facility dogs and therapy animals so we can do it appropriately. We don't want to prejudice anyone by having facility dogs at a jury trial. But, you know, we could, if people are interested, we could set up trainings for that. Expansions of facility dogs and therapy animals. Therapy dogs are actually Medicaid covered services. There's just not a network for it. We got Matt Dietz talking about pets in foster care. I encourage foster parents to have therapy dogs. I've heard personal stories from foster parents that with some kids that have been through trauma, it's made a big difference. And, you know, kids that enter foster care have been through a lot of trauma. Their adverse childhood experiences are very high. And I actually think that if you're a foster parent and you have a therapy dog, you should be able to get paid as a therapeutic board rate, which is a higher rate. Lastly, legislation requiring adult and child abuse investigations to assess animal neglect and abuse. I think that that would also be very important. And those are the possible next step, and it's a call of action. I mean, the animal law section, you know, you are going to be the leaders, I believe. And I just appreciate I got the opportunity to talk to everyone today and talk about something that I'm passionate about and hope gets expanded and expanded. But I think you can see from Matt Dietz's initial slideshow that or video that it is something that is happening. Let's do it right. Matt?
Well, thank you so much, Alan. Love the videos and love the pictures, and let me first introduce myself. Can I have the screen?
I'm trying to figure out how to do that. There you go.
There I go. So I'm Matthew Dietz, and I'm currently I'm no longer the chair of the animal law section. I was the chair of the animal law section. Now I'm the immediate past chair of the animal law section. I also am the litigation director of Disability Independence Group, which is a nonprofit that advocates for opportunities and the rights for persons with disabilities. And like most members of the animal law section, animal law was not my first or my only type of profession. I had other things, and I started getting into what animals do. And as a lawyer for persons with disabilities, my reach was dealing with folks that had service animals and also emotional support animals. And I saw what emotional support animals do for people with disabilities who need them. And I thought, they do so much good. Why aren't they more prevalent in the foster care system? Let me turn on my PowerPoint. Share from beginning. Now, as you see on the top of the screen is Lucy, and Lucy comes to work with me every day. I am a firm believer in the fact that dogs help stress and help wellness, especially for folks that have a stressful profession like all lawyers are, where, as I said most recently in a Supreme Court argument, that most lawyers in the state of Florida have some type of mental issue, mental problem, mental illness, whether it's anxiety, depression, in some time in their career. And that's what the studies have shown. So Lucy, especially Lucy in the beach in Miami, is my litigation support dog. The power of dog. The therapeutic power of a companion animal reduces trauma, builds resilience, and provides normalcy for dependent children who are removed from biological parents and caregivers due to allegations of abuse, neglect, or dependency, and placed into a traditional foster care setting. In Florida, there are approximately 12,500 children in foster homes and another 13,000 children who are foster children placed with relatives. This is, it should be undisputed that removing a child from his or her birth parents, whether those parents are good parents or not good parents, is the most traumatic event for a child. It could lead to a diagnosis of PTSD, and statistics have demonstrated that these kids, 3 out of 5 of these children suffer from diagnosed mental illness. So it makes sense that dogs are used as a tool in order to assist these kids. In as much as they help children get through the court system and get through the process, dependency process, there's no doubt that animals can help children also traverse through the dependency system and acclimate to a new life and a new home. More than 70% of US households with minor children have pets. We found approximately 45% of foster families have pets. As I was saying, animals can influence positive psychological development in children by improving their cognitive abilities, teaching them empathy, supporting self-esteem, offering opportunities to build interpersonal skills, and presenting them with the opportunities to confront loss and respond to grief. Children who form a bond with companion animals score higher on measures of social competence and empathy. And children perceive pets as important family members, providers of social interactions, affection, and emotional support. Pets are children's secret keepers. Pets provide comfort at night by petting an animal, and pets make you feel good. In doing so, interacting with animals, as Alan was saying, shows decreased levels of cortisol and lower blood pressure, reduce loneliness, increase feelings of social support, and boost your mood. And also, as you've seen in, gosh, so many social media posts of children reading to animals. It's been shown in studies that kids who read to animals show better social skills, more sharing, cooperation, and volunteering, and also have fewer behavioral problems. They were more engaged with their peers. The researchers suggest that animals offer unconditional acceptance, making them calm comfort to their children. So, and also the addition of pets to a family, or a foster family, or a family that's not a foster family, brings new responsibilities. Showing how to care and feed for an animal is part of owning a pet and teaches kids responsibilities and routine. So part of the issue that we've seen and that we've had is the child-animal bond is something that really is not taken into account as much during dependency proceedings. If an animal is abused, the CPIs, the child protective investigators, really don't ask what's happening with the children, and vice versa. If a child is being abused, there's no questions about what's happening with the child. So these things are issues that need to be investigated more, but some of the important issues that come up in this regard is what happens when a child is removed from a home? What happens to that child's animal? Should that animal go with the child? What psychological damage will be caused by the separation? Now, more and more we're seeing that dependency judges are becoming trained and more knowledgeable to ask these questions. And in Miami-Dade, we specifically went to the child-based care agencies and the dependency judges to urge that they ask these questions about the child-animal bond. And also what can be entered is placement orders with regards to that animal when it comes to the shelter order. Should the child go with the animal? Should a protective order be issued to stay away from the animal and forbid harming the animal? The court has the authority to impose conditions on the current or future possession of the animals with regards to these orders, and it is important that they do so. If this bond is broken, there's a higher risk of developing behavioral problems, failing academically, and engaging in criminal and delinquent behavior. And also, children are more vulnerable to physical and psychological problems such as drug abuse, addiction, and its consequences. One of the part of the issues that we've found is that there are currently no policies and procedures that require the CPI to ask questions about animals in a home. The only question in the current Florida procedures are to determine for a home safety evaluation whether the animals are dangerous. There is no cross-reporting for animal abuse or child abuse and domestic violence. There is no increased penalties for animal abuse in the process of domestic violence or family violence. When part of the questions when when Alan and I first started speaking was, what would foster parents do with animals? Would foster parents want animals in their homes? How many, with the limitation of funding to foster families, would they really be interested in having additional responsibilities? And what the surveys have found so far is yes. Many foster families currently do have animals. 45% of them do have animals currently. Also, many others would be willing to get animals if the $500 or so a month that a foster family gets is increased, because that's not a lot of money for a child, and it's even less for a child with an animal. But if the questions are not asked, then we'll never know whether or not a child can go with the animal and what foster homes would be available not only to take a child and an animal. And the next question is, would there be additional subsidies, as Alan said, if the animal is deemed to offer therapeutic assistance? Going into including animals in therapeutic assistance, there is a huge movement now in using animal-assisted therapies in child abuse and neglect prevention and intervention strategies. We've seen what animals can do with regards to making children comfortable in proceedings through the Justice's Best Friend Act. But many other facilities are obtaining animals to assist with therapies. To assist children, it's not only would assist children to talk in aiding the prosecution of a child abuser, but also it assists children to talk with regards to proceeding in their therapies, to talking with the therapist, to feeling more open to interventions. And more animals are used in animal-assisted therapy, not only in Florida, but across the United States. And it's important as well, when there is a safety plan with children returning to their home, to include the safety of in-home animals when ensuring compliance with the safety and permanency plan. These are all things, the welfare of a family animal should be included in the safety plan as well, because the welfare of the family animal also goes hand in hand with the welfare of the child. And it's important to encourage foster parent and relative care, to encourage child-animal interaction, to promote positive psychological development with the child. Now, in the United States, the numbers are astounding. There are nearly 437,000 children in foster care. Miami-Dade itself has 568 foster homes. And the requirements of a foster parent is to be 21 years of age, financially stable, and both be physically and emotionally able to care for children, and to pass a background check. But the issue is, with regards to animals, is foster parents are eligible for a monthly board rate, which offsets the cost of fostering, which is about $466 to $560 a month. What needs to happen, and what we're currently working on in DIG, is to see whether or not there's ways in which to increase the stipend for foster families to have animals. So it costs approximately $1,000 to $1,500 a year to have an animal. So the question is whether or not there can be an increase in the foster family subsidies in order to make up the difference for a foster child to have an animal, or for a foster family to introduce animal therapy within the home. Now, the question is, how would this affect the child? And that's something that's still unknown, but we basically know that from the key metrics of the child welfare system, what this can do. And if I ever press the left click instead of the right click, I won't get that. So the metrics, the key metrics of the child welfare system is, number one, placement stability. The current statistics is, as of 2019, 4.6 moves for each child's 1,000 days in foster care. The national standard is 4.12 moves. In Miami-Dade, the current number of moves is 5.73. So having an animal, having the responsibility, having the care of an animal, and the love of an animal, and the secret secret keeping of an animal, we believe would make this performance statistic go down. It would increase stability in a foster home until reunification or until permanency. Then the next statistic is permanency. Within 12 months of removal is DCF's primary indicator of timely permanency. Statewide performance fell to 35.58% in 2018, which is below the national average of 40.5%. So the issue is children are staying in foster care placements longer prior to a permanent placement. The length of stay. And this is the last factor. The length of stay for children that exited out-of-home care has increased and now is 3 months longer than in 2014. Children exiting care to reunification, guardianship, and adoption, on average, are spending an additional 3.45 months in out-of-home care now than in 2014. So the length of stay, the road to permanency would all benefit from having pets in a foster care situation. And also, as if I could say, having pictures of animals on PowerPoint slides make PowerPoint slides so much more palatable. So, benefits of placing animals with foster children. Number one, permanent stability will improve during the presence of a companion animal, as it would provide the child an opportunity to develop a faster connection with the foster parent through the shared love and responsibility of caring for the animal. You know, a lot of these things are just common sense. You would think that this would be something that would have been done now for the past 20 years, because everybody knows the love and support that an animal provides. So it would just be common sense for that same love and support to be transferred to the foster system. Placement stability will in turn avoid interruption of treatment services, which are in place, such as individual therapy, group therapy, and supportive education service, which are necessary to reach permanency. Lastly, the length of stay in care will be reduced as a result of treatment compliance and accessibility, which is created due to placement stability. In addition, it's a matter of almost common sense that having animals in your home, having the care, the connection, the additional responsibilities of animals will assist with regards to psychological treatment and care, and transfer to normalcy. Some of the questions that are usually asked when it comes to the separation of foster children and animals is, how will the child acclimate to from getting a dog to possibly losing the dog when it comes to only having the dog during foster care. Now, these things are not a given. To the extent that a child receives the dog in foster care and the child is bonded to the dog, there's nothing that would prevent a permanency plan to include the animal within the permanency plan. So the question is, how do you create a system that doesn't previously exist to incorporate human-animal interaction within the current system that we have? And it appears that the biggest barrier that we thought we had was resistance by foster families. And it turns out that that is not a barrier. So let me stop sharing so I could actually see if there's questions here. And are there any questions with regards, or any ideas or thoughts with regards to incorporating animals into our system of foster care? So I'm still on, right? No, I'm just kidding. Alan, would you like to show your wonderful video of Tibet?
Yes. Let me put it up.
Absolutely.
1 second.
Every single witness that I've ever worked with in my 20
you gotta share.
is dreaded
Okay,
going to
1
trial.
second.
Every eye in the courtroom watches them. And they watch them walk all the way across the courtroom. Everybody in the courtroom is waiting on you to get up there.
I'm finding it.
I've experienced that. It's an unpleasant feeling.
It's very frightening to adults, but it's even more so for a child.
If you're prosecuting.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You just have to share.
1 second. Do you see a slide with, what do you see on your screen now?
I see my happy face.
So I got to share. What do you see now?
There you go. You started.
Matt, there's a couple questions in the Q&A that came in.
Okay.
And I'll set this up. Let's see. Can you
Oh, great. 2 wonderful questions. While he's doing that, will children with animals children who abuse animals be excluded? Absolutely, of course. Children who abuse animals would not be included within this system. It would only be children who like animals, who do not have a prior experience with abusing animals. How is animal welfare tracked in a system like this? Within the foster care system, there are checks and wellness activities and ways to ensure that both the animal and the child are doing well in the system. So there's more supervision in this type of system than there is otherwise. Alan?
Can you see it?
Nope.
Wait,
It's not on your screen. It's on your other screen.
It's on my other screen, so I got to do the switch over. 1 second.
Although these numbers are slowly being reduced by volunteers through organizations
when the child leaves for foster care
and guardian ad
the
litem
child,
in Floral County.
Yeah, we have considered this, and what the plan is the animal, if the animal starts with the child, the animal should be included within the permanency plan. So there would be circumstances in which a foster family has a animal already, or there are several foster children in one household where it would be difficult to track a single child with that animal. But in circumstances where there's one animal and there is one child, the animal could be incorporated within the permanency plan to go with the child. But going back to what Peggy was saying, in the property conception that we have of animals, the child would have to be an adult in order to have that animal. And until that time, the beneficial owner of that animal would be the foster family. Training would be provided and encouraged before an animal is placed with a foster family, without a doubt. It is important to train the foster families with regards to assisted animal therapy. In addition, what we are looking to do is to measure the effects of having an animal with the foster family. That would include measuring recidivism, I don't mean recidivism, permanency, other treatments, how long each foster child stays within the house, whether or not, what happens to grades, and all of these things would need to be measured, especially in a pilot program, to ensure that this works. And if a welfare check identifies abuse of the animal, then like any other abuse situation, then the animal would be taken away. Okay. It's on. Turn on the volume.
There is additional comfort missing for the abused, neglected, and abandoned children who are facing the dependency court system.
Nobody wants a trial that brings any more stress. Nobody wants children that are upset, whether it's waiting outside a courtroom or in a proceeding. And whenever we have a tool available, I think it should be accessed and welcomed in every circumstance.
Nobody wants to come to court. Everybody that's here is is here because they were told and because there's a problem.
It's frightening. Even as a guardian ad litem, and I've testified many times, I'm slightly intimidated. But these children are to the point where they barely can talk sometimes.
When children have to go into the courtroom, they're very scared, they're very nervous, intimidated, anxious. A lot of them don't want to go.
In my experience, I have not seen anything used in the courtroom except for maybe stuffed animals. But otherwise, it was more of a sterile, scary environment for children.
We have to try and be especially sensitive to them. And it's very difficult. And we have to do everything we can to make sure that when a child testifies, that they feel safe and that they feel like they can truly tell their story without being harmed again.
And as a guardian, we act as the voice for these children in the courtroom. Sometimes the child has to use their own voice.
We try not to, but sometimes they're the best witness or they're the only witness.
And sometimes there are certain pieces of information that can change the entire outcome of a case, and we might not get that.
I happened to come across an internet post about the Canine Companions for Independence and the Courthouse Dogs program. I was immediately intrigued and thought, this is the program we need in Hillsborough County. Simultaneously, Brenda was hearing about the program as well.
I became a guardian ad litem in 2009, working with children, doing cases and helping children navigate this system. In 2011 or so, I became aware of this program, sent away for some information. After viewing it, I decided that I knew exactly what I was going to be doing with the rest of my life.
In early 2014, Voices for Children of Tampa Bay was the first in Florida to staff a facility dog in the courtrooms. In unison with the Guardian Ad Litem program of Hillsborough County, volunteer Brenda Coker was introduced with her courtroom facility dog, Tibet. Both graduated from the Canine Companions for Independence campus in Orlando, also known as CCI.
From the application process, which again is so intense and so rigorous, and then the commitment to the program by the handler is incredibly professional. The handler must change almost every aspect of their life. They have to understand that the program is not about the handler, it's about the dog.
Courthouse dogs train for years to succeed in providing comfort to abused, neglected, and abandoned children who are facing the dependency court system. A courthouse dog is there to bestow a sense of calm to witnesses. They facilitate the fact-finding process because a composed witness can better describe an event to a judge or a jury.
I think that Brenda Coker and Betsy Smith from Voices for Children really did their homework when they were looking at bringing a dog program to Hillsborough County.
It took a little convincing to the board. We needed to have a lot of discussions. A lot of people aren't dog people. After a lot of conversations and voting and this and that, we decided to adopt the program.
Well, my concerns, of course, for first was the size. You know, Tibet's a decent-sized dog. Decent-sized dog have decent-sized teeth. If she would ever snap at a child or at an adult, how would she behave? How such a dog of that size would be around the courthouse?
In the very beginning, when Tibet was first being rolled out as a program that was starting in Hillsborough County, the adults were told that we weren't allowed to touch her, we weren't allowed to look at her in the courtroom or the courthouse. And I think all of the adults were okay with that at first. We didn't think we'd really get attached to a dog. We were so wrong.
I've seen nothing but positive outcomes in using her on the several cases we've been able to collaborate on. I've also seen the positive outcome of having her in offices with staff, because this is a high stress, high burnout field, and everybody responds positively to her, whether they're a child or an adult. These folks have a very hard job, and the burnout and turnover rate is very high. And what happens with that is that you have people that are trained to do a job leave that job, and then you bring in a new person who doesn't have the experience, and that reduces the quality of work for that child. So we want to keep those people that are highly trained
and very good at their jobs. And this is one of the ways that we can do that. It's very hard to deal with what you deal with as an adult every day and make sure that the kids that have been hurt or affected are safe, and to protect those that have not been. And she gives us a little bit of an outlet from that to let us know that everything will be okay.
What I like most about Tibet and what the program represents is what I call the unspoken language. You know, she has that language that she doesn't have to use the words. Us as lawyers like to use a lot of words. People like to use a lot of words. Tibet uses no words.
These children need all the support they can get, and Tibet provides that support. So I would encourage other circuits, other states to introduce a Tibet, a facility dog, into their program.
The challenge that we're coming up against in replicating this in other parts of the state is finding a volunteer who is going to dedicate and really have the kind of commitment level that we need for this program. Brenda, this is like an unpaid job. She's a volunteer and this is her job.
And we feel incredibly fortunate and blessed to have her as a part of our program, spreading the word about what we do, and her poise and her confidence in knowing that she is helping these children, so many children, just makes the program that much more successful.
I feel called to do this work. I feel that the children that are traumatized, abused, abandoned, and neglected deserve the highest and the best of everything that we have to give them. I believe they deserve the most passionate and involved child advocates, and that's what I am. And I believe that I'm providing them the highest and the best form of support through this beautiful canine, and supporting them through very difficult processes that they have to endure through no fault of their own.
The mission of the Courthouse Dog Program of Voices for Children is to champion justice with support through trained courthouse dogs, to provide emotional support for the abused, neglected, and abandoned children who are facing the dependency court system during stressful and difficult proceedings.
Well, thank you very much. Again, for those of you who can get CLE credits, the course number is 3355, and this is eligible for 4.0 general credits. In addition, please, for Father's Day or just for fun, get one of our shirts, our hoodies, our sweatshirts. The link is in the chat section. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to email one of the panelists. I'll have copies of the panelists' presentation. The seminar will be on YouTube if you want to see another part of it again. And thank you so much for attending today. I hope you all found it to be great. Please also, if you're not currently a member of the Animal Law section, join the Animal Law section. It's the best section in the Florida Bar. And I just got dinged because I'm forgetting to say something. And also, if you liked it and you don't want to buy a t-shirt or a hoodie and you don't want to be a member of the Animal Law section, you could also feel free to make a donation to the Animal Law section or sponsor our events. If you want any sponsor opportunities, please feel free to email me and I'll be more than happy to assist. And again, thank you so much, and we hope you enjoyed your Friday afternoon, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, everybody.